Welcome back, everyone. This is Paranormal M, and I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, please turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos, and if you enjoy tonight's stories, please give the video a like. The first story is about a person who rented a room in an old downtown house. Nothing much happened for a while, aside from a strange feeling they couldn't quite explain. Then one night, a mirror moved in a way that made no sense. Get comfortable and sleep well tonight. Honestly, I wish I were making this up. Back in the fall of 2021, I was supposed to move away for grad school. I had everything mentally packed and ready to go, but then I found out my classes were going to be online because of COVID. So, at the last minute, I decided to stay in my hometown for one more semester. That meant I suddenly needed a place to live, and I was scrambling. Through a friend, I found a sublet in this old 2-bedroom unit inside a larger house that had been split into apartments. My roommate was the landlord's younger son, who was in undergrad, and his older brother lived in the upstairs unit. The house itself was gorgeous. It was one of those older homes in the historic part of downtown, with tall ceilings, big windows, and so much character. My bedroom was huge, almost too huge. Since I knew I wasn't staying long, I only brought the basics: a bed, a desk, and a dresser. So the room always felt a little too open, a little hollow. Looking back, I do remember feeling like I was being watched sometimes. Not constantly, not in a dramatic movie kind of way. Just this quiet little feeling that I wasn't totally alone. But nothing ever happened, so I brushed it off. I figured the room just felt strange because it was so empty. About a month after moving in, I bought this old standing mirror from Facebook Marketplace for maybe $20. It looked charming in the photos, but once I got it home, I realized it was kind of flimsy and smaller than I expected. Not really what I wanted. A little later, I found a simple mirror from IKEA that could hang on the back of a closet door, so I used that instead. The vintage mirror ended up tucked into the back of one closet, behind all my hanging clothes. The clothes were long enough that they completely covered it. Then I hung the IKEA mirror on the back of the opposite closet door. That closet was basically empty, except for an old travel bag. So, yes, the two mirrors were technically facing each other from opposite sides of the room. I know. But both closet doors were always shut, so I didn't think much of it. Then, maybe 4 months after I moved in, my boyfriend, Lucas, and I were lying in bed getting ready to sleep. We were facing the closet door with the IKEA mirror on it. I was looking down at my phone, just scrolling for a minute, and then I locked it and set it down because I was about to get up and go to the bathroom one last time. The second I put my phone down, I looked up, and the mirror was floating. It was still attached at the top somehow, but the bottom had lifted straight out, so the whole mirror was sticking out from the closet door, almost parallel with the floor. I froze. My brain just could not understand what I was seeing. I grabbed Lucas behind me and whispered something like, Look at the mirror." The moment he saw it, I heard him react. And right then, the mirror dropped. It slammed back against the closet door with this loud bang. It genuinely looked like someone had lifted the bottom of it up, held it there until we both noticed, and then let it crash down. The mirror wasn't heavy, maybe 5 or 6 pounds, and it was honestly kind of cheap. But still, there was no breeze, no shaking, no loose hook swinging around. Nothing that made sense. We were both completely stunned. Strangely, I don't remember feeling like we were in danger. I was scared, of course, but more than that, I felt confused. Curious, even. It didn't feel aggressive. It felt intentional. Still, we left immediately and stayed at his place that night. The strangest part is that nothing else ever happened. No footsteps, no lights flickering, No voices, no weird noises. Just that one moment, totally out of nowhere. I'm honestly so grateful Lucas was there with me, because if I had been alone, I might have convinced myself I imagined it. But he saw it too. We've both tried to come up with normal explanations over the years, and neither of us can figure out how it physically happened. It has been years now, and I still think about it. I've always been interested in paranormal stories, but that was the first time anything like that ever happened to me personally. And whoever, or whatever it was, she really chose drama for her debut. Ever since I was little, whenever someone close to me passed away, I'd sometimes see them in my dreams. At first, I never really thought too deeply about it. I figured maybe that was just how my mind handled grief. But there are a few dreams I've had that still stay with me, the kind that make me wonder if it was only my imagination, or if maybe someone was trying to reach me in the only way they could. In 2021, several older relatives in my family caught COVID around the same time. It hit them hard, very quickly. They ended up in the hospital, on ventilators, placed in medically induced comas. And that was when the dreams started. They all began the same way. I'd be standing in my room, and the sunlight would be coming through the windows at this perfect angle. The whole apartment looked warm and golden, almost unreal, but peaceful. Then I'd hear a knock at the front door. When I opened it, my great-aunt Marta was standing there. We talked like we always had. I asked her how she was feeling, and she looked at me gently and said she didn't have much time left. She told me she had come to say goodbye. I asked her about my cousin Leona, who was in the hospital too, and she told me quietly that Leona wasn't going to make it either. Not long after that, they both passed away. That same month, my grandfather also died from COVID. But he didn't come to me in a dream until after he was already gone. I was devastated, mostly because I never got to say goodbye. I carried so much guilt over that. Then the dreams began, and they came again and again. They started almost the same way as the others, with that golden light filling the apartment. But this time, there was no knock at the door. Instead, I would walk into the kitchen, and my grandfather would be sitting there at the table. Every time, I'd start crying. I'd tell him I was sorry. I'd say I was so sorry I hadn't been able to say goodbye. And every time, he would just sit there silently. He wouldn't move. He wouldn't speak. He'd only look at me. Then, in the last dream I ever had about him, everything started the same. I walked into the kitchen, saw him sitting there, and completely broke down. I cried so hard that I put my head in his lap. That was when he finally moved. He placed his hand gently on my head and told me he wasn't angry with me. He said he forgave me. After that, I never dreamed about him again. My dreams are always vivid. I can move around in them. I can speak. I can think clearly while they're happening. My grandmother believes our loved ones can communicate with us through dreams, especially when they have something important to say. I honestly don't know what I believe. Part of me thinks grief can create powerful things in the mind, but another part of me still wonders, because those dreams didn't feel random. They felt like visits, and I've never really stopped thinking about them. I was about 7 years old when this happened. We were living in Las Cruces, New Mexico, not too far from El Paso, and even now, all these years later, I can still picture that house clearly. We lived there for a few years, and the whole time, I remember feeling like the place had a strange weight to it, not exactly evil, but heavy, like the air was always holding its breath. I was a kid, so I didn't have words for it back then. I just knew I never felt completely alone there. One evening, I was sitting with my mom, looking through old family photos. I loved doing that, just flipping through pictures and asking who everyone was. At one point, I found a photo of a man holding my older sister, Elise. He looked so much like my dad that I didn't even question it. I pointed at the picture and said, "Look, it's Dad holding Elise." My mom looked over and got quiet for a second. Then she said, very gently, "No, sweetheart, that's your Uncle Kent. He was your dad's older brother. He passed away in a car accident when you were still a baby." I remember feeling this cold sadness settle over me. I had never really understood death before that. I didn't know we had family members who were gone, and even though I had never known him, the idea of this uncle, someone who looked so much like my dad, being dead just stayed with me. That night, I went to bed thinking about him. I had bunk beds, and I was sleeping on the top bunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I felt a gust of air across my face. Not just a little draft, but enough to pull me out of sleep. At first, everything was dark and blurry. My eyes were still adjusting. But then I realized there was someone standing right next to my bed. Because I was on the top bunk, his face was almost level with mine. I thought it was my dad checking on me, so I mumbled, "Dad, can you get me some water?" Then I closed my eyes again. But he didn't answer. After a moment, I opened my eyes, and by then I could see more clearly. And I knew right away it wasn't my dad. It was a man who looked a lot like him, but not quite. He was smiling at me, this soft, still smile, but where his eyes should have been, there were just dark, empty places. His whole body had this bluish-gray tint, almost like he was made of smoke or moonlight. I could kind of see through him. I was terrified. I pulled the blanket over my head as fast as I could. I remember my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the mattress. After a few seconds, I got brave enough to peek out. He was still there, still standing by my bed, still smiling. I yanked the blanket back over my head and shouted, "Go away!" When I looked again, he was gone. I turned over to face the wall, pulled the blankets tight around me, and somehow fell back asleep like that. In the morning, I woke up in the exact same position, still gripping the sheets over my head. I never told my family when it happened. I was sure they wouldn't believe me. Years later, I mentioned it to my sister, and she just kind of brushed it off. And honestly, I understand why. I know it could have been a dream. I know my uncle had been on my mind before I went to sleep, and maybe my imagination filled in the rest. But the strange thing is, I still remember it so clearly. I'm an adult now, and I can still see his face beside that bunk bed. I can still remember the color of him, the empty eyes, the way the room felt. I've never had another experience like that since. One detail that has stayed with me is that my bed faced the closet, and the closet doors were mirrored sliding doors. I didn't hear until much later that some people believe mirrors can act like portals, especially when they face your bed. I don't know if I believe that, but when I think back to that room, it still gives me chills. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was grief I didn't understand yet. Maybe it was my uncle visiting in the only way a child could recognize him. But whatever it was, it felt real, and I've never forgotten it. So this happened to me on April 21st, on a bus I almost never take. That morning, I woke up with this strange little urge to change things up. I remember thinking, you know what? Today I'm going to take a different bus. Just try another route for once. And that's not really like me. I'm very much a routine person. I like knowing where I'm going, what time I'm leaving, which stop I'm standing at. Changing the smallest thing can make me nervous. But that morning, for some reason, I did it anyway. So I got on this other bus. It was around 9:15 in the morning when I noticed an older man sitting nearby, and I recognized him right away. His name was Aldo, or at least, I thought it was Aldo. He's the grandfather of one of my brother's old friends, Alessandro. Our families have known each other for years. He knows my mom, he knew my grandmother, he knows everyone. He runs a little fruit and vegetable shop in town, the kind of place where people stop in for tomatoes and leave after 20 minutes of gossip. So I said hello, and he smiled like he knew me too. We started talking. He told me Alessandro was moving up north because he had found work there. We talked about how hard it is for young people to find decent jobs, how everything feels more complicated than it used to. We complained a little, laughed a little. Then he asked about my brother, by name. He asked how he was doing, whether he had settled into things, and then he asked about my mother too. And because I believed I was speaking to Aldo, I answered naturally. Nothing about it felt strange in the moment. He was dressed neatly, almost like he had made an effort that day. He told me he'd been to the hospital to pick up some paperwork, and that he had left his car somewhere because traffic had been awful. Then his phone rang. And this part matters. He had a smartphone. I remember watching him struggle a bit to answer it, tapping the screen with his finger, missing the button the first time. You know how some older people are with touchscreens? Eventually the call ended, or maybe he missed it, and then he called the person back. A few minutes later, he started getting ready to get off the bus. He told me the driver already knew where to stop for him. Then, before stepping down, he shook the driver's hand and said goodbye to me. That was it. When I got to where I was going, around 9:40, I called my mom and said, "Guess who I saw on the bus this morning? Aldo." I told her everything. The hospital, Alessandro moving north, the whole conversation. It felt like a normal little family update. But that night, when I got home, my mom and brother were waiting for me with these looks on their faces. My mom said, "What exactly happened this morning?" I asked what she meant. She told me she had called Aldo's daughter because they're friends and mentioned Alessandro moving away. But Alessandro wasn't moving anywhere. He had no job up north, no plans to leave, nothing. And then she told me something even stranger. Aldo had been at home the entire morning until at least 10 a.m. He hadn't gone to the hospital. He doesn't take buses. He wouldn't even know which one to get on. I honestly thought they were joking. I said, "What are you talking about? I saw him. I spoke to him." My mom showed me a picture of Aldo, and I said, "Yes, that's him. That is exactly who I talked to." Later that night, Aldo's wife even got on the phone with me and gently told me he had been home with her the whole morning. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Aldo doesn't own a car. So I said, "Okay, then check his phone. He got a call while we were on the bus. I saw it." And that's when they told me Aldo doesn't own a smartphone. He has an old flip phone because he never learned how to use the modern ones. So now I'm left with this. Who did I talk to? How did he know my brother's name? Why did he ask about my mom like he knew her? Because Aldo is a kind man, a lovely man. It would make perfect sense for him to ask about my family if I met him at his shop or on the street. But the man on that bus was not Aldo. And there's one more thing I can't stop thinking about. My birthday was on April 18th. My late grandfather's birthday was on April 16th. He passed away in October 2022, and I still miss him so much. I think about him constantly. Part of me wonders if, somehow, it was him. And if it was you, Grandpa, then I'm glad you came to sit with me for a little while. But I won't lie. It still scares me. Because I can't explain it. Recently, I guided a friend of a friend, Anna, into a deep trance for a shamanic journey session. She's an energy healer based in the UK, and a lot of her work is connected to earth grids and ley lines. It's the kind of work most people never see. Quiet, subtle, mostly invisible. But energetically, it can ask a lot from a person. And for the past couple of years, Anna had been feeling exhausted in a way she couldn't quite explain. Not just tired. It felt deeper than that, almost like something was constantly drawing from her system, no matter how much she slept or rested or tried to recover. As we moved deeper into the session, she began to notice a heaviness along the right side of her face. So I asked her to bring her awareness closer to it, and when she did, she started seeing flashes of green. Then she saw an eye, a reptilian eye. As the session unfolded, it became clear that this presence had attached after an astral travel experience that hadn't been properly closed. And then she remembered the morning it happened. She remembered seeing that same flash of an eye. She remembered the strange weakness in her face afterward. And she remembered thinking, "I'll clear it later." But later never really came. When the archangel stepped in to remove it, the being resisted. It was angry, furious really, that it had been noticed after staying hidden for so long. Her body released this deep shudder, and afterward she described it as a kind of rage scream moving through her. And then, suddenly, everything went still. Quiet. She said the right side of her face felt cool and open for the first time in years. I still remember the surprise in her voice when she said that, like she was only just realizing how much pressure she had been living with. After the clearing, Archangel Michael came through very strongly. The message was direct. We are always here. She must be diligent. Tired or not, she must be diligent. This work is not casual. In some ways, it is like a war. She is on the front line. And then the energy softened. The next message came through much more gently. See through the eyes of love. That stayed with me, because the lesson wasn't fear. It was diligence. When we do deep spiritual work, especially with astral travel, healing, grids, or clearing, we can't leave things half open just because we're tired. Those small, unfinished moments can become doorways we don't realize we've left behind. Anna said the lightness was immediate. Her head felt clear again, almost like it could breathe. And it reminded me of something important. Sometimes the thing we put off for one day becomes the thing we carry for 2 years. So my best friend Mira and I have always been really in sync, but lately it's gotten to the point where it's not just funny anymore. It used to be this cute little thing, like, wow, we're basically the same person. But now when it happens, we both just kind of stop talking for a second. We met about 3 years ago while we were in the hospital, and we ended up living there at the same time for around 6 months. That kind of experience bonds you in a way that's hard to explain. We've been best friends ever since. We're both doing better now. Not exactly living the most ordinary, perfectly put together lives, but we're getting there. Slowly. In our own way. Even though we only see each other in person every couple of months, we're on call almost constantly. Like basically all day, every day. Sometimes we're talking. Sometimes we're just quietly existing together while doing our own things. And over time, strange little things started happening. Our cycles lined up. We'll make the same random noise at the exact same time, even if it's a sound neither of us has ever made before. We'll say the same sentence together. We'll guess the same answer. It's happened so often that it doesn't even feel like a coincidence anymore. There's also this weird number thing. For ages now, I've been seeing the number 23 everywhere, and Mira keeps seeing 32 everywhere. Same digits, flipped around. But what happened today is what really made me want to talk about it. We were on call like usual, and Mira went to have dinner with her parents. She muted herself, and I didn't have her camera open, so I had absolutely no way of knowing when she came back. While she was gone, I was working on a few things. Then I got bored and randomly opened Reddit, which I barely ever use. I honestly forget it exists most of the year. I didn't even have anything specific in mind. I just clicked around for a bit and started typing something completely random. I typed, "knock knock," and I promise you, the exact second I typed the question mark, I heard Mira's voice come back through the call, and she said, "knock knock." I just froze, because we never say that, ever. It's not some inside joke. We hadn't watched anything, read anything, or talked about anything related to knock-knock jokes. There was no setup for it, no reason. I know people might say it was subconscious, and I get that explanation for some things, but this didn't feel like that. We don't really go out much right now, and we're not constantly around the same outside influences, so it's not like we both picked it up from somewhere during the day. Things like this keep happening, and honestly, it's starting to feel a little eerie. Maybe this matters, maybe it doesn't, but my grandmother had a shamanic background, and Mira's mom is into witchcraft. I don't know what to make of that, but with everything else, it's hard not to wonder. So I guess I'm asking, what could this be? Because at this point, it feels way beyond normal coincidence. I had sleep paralysis again last night, for the first time in a long while, and honestly, it shook me more than I expected. I used to deal with it a lot when I was younger, not once or twice, but constantly. From around the time I was 11 until I was 18, it happened almost every night whenever I slept in the apartment where I grew up. And I know how this sounds, I really do. Most of me believes there's a reasonable explanation. Stress, sleep disruption, the brain doing strange things in that half-awake state. But there's still this small, stubborn part of me that remembers how real it felt. When I was a kid, my mother and I moved into a new apartment after she separated from my father. It was a difficult time, and I'm sure that mattered. The building was right beside an old funeral home, though I didn't realize what it was at first. It was quiet, plain, easy to ignore. Later, it became harder to ignore. Not long after we moved in, maybe a week or two, I had my first episode. I woke up to the sound of a storm so violent it felt like the whole world was being torn apart outside. The windows, the walls, everything sounded like it was being hit at once. Underneath it was this sharp electronic ringing, high and unbearable, like some machine screaming from another room. Then I realized I couldn't move. I was completely frozen. I could only move my eyes. My bedroom door was cracked open, and I remember staring into that dark gap, absolutely certain something was coming down the hallway toward me. Not walking, coming fast. And whatever it was, it hated me. That was the feeling. Pure harm. But it never arrived. It kept getting closer and somehow stayed just out of sight. Then I noticed a girl standing beside my bed. She looked normal, like a kid I might have passed in school. Nothing dramatic, nothing floating or glowing, just a girl. But in that moment, I knew she was dead. I don't mean I believe that now with total certainty. I mean that while it was happening, I knew it the way you know your own name. She looked terrified. She said, "We have to leave. It's almost here." I couldn't answer her. I couldn't tell her I was stuck. She started getting more frantic, and that made me even more afraid, because it felt like she didn't understand why I wasn't moving. Then she stepped backward into the darkness of the room and disappeared. Eventually, I managed to move the tips of my fingers. Once that happened, it was like something released its grip on me. My body came back slowly, heavy and strange, like I was dragging myself up from deep water. The second I could move, I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. Outside, there was no storm, no wind, no rain, nothing. Just a still, quiet summer night. After that, my sleep changed completely. The episodes came again and again. Sometimes I saw people. Sometimes I only felt things hiding in the dark. But there was always that same terrible certainty that something was approaching. I started avoiding sleep. I would stay up all night, then nap after school whenever I could. But you can't live like that forever. Eventually, sleep catches you, and when it did, the paralysis was waiting. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone. I thought I might be losing my mind. It felt too strange to say out loud. Years later, when I finally learned what sleep paralysis was, I felt this huge wave of relief. There was a name for it. There was science behind it. I wasn't broken. But the part I've never been able to fully explain is that it only happened in that apartment. I slept at friends' houses all the time. I visited my father during the summers. I stayed in other places, other beds, other rooms. Nothing happened there. Only that apartment. And when I moved out at 18, it almost completely stopped. The sensible answer is that I was under constant stress in that place, and once I left, my body finally calmed down. That makes the most sense. I believe that, mostly. But since then, I've had a few isolated episodes, and they've all been connected to certain places. Places that gave me this weird physical unease before I even fell asleep. It's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but it feels like a small hook caught somewhere in my chest. In my early 20s, I lived in another apartment for a short time. I had one intense episode there. I saw an older woman standing near the foot of the bed. She was speaking quickly in a language I didn't understand, but I had the strong impression it was Polish. She didn't feel dangerous. Urgent, yes. Upset, maybe. But not cruel. Later, I found out that neighborhood had once been home to a large Polish immigrant community. Could be coincidence. Probably is. Then last night happened. I was staying at a friend's place in an old pre-war building, and before I went to sleep, I felt that same pressure in my chest. That same quiet warning feeling with no clear reason behind it. I woke up to heavy footsteps in the hallway outside the guest room. Slow pacing. Boots on old floors. And then the ringing started again. It got louder whenever the footsteps came closer to the door, then faded when they moved away. Every so often, the footsteps stopped right outside the room, and the ringing became so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. I don't truly think this is supernatural. Not completely. Sleep paralysis is understood well enough, and the mind is very good at turning fear into shapes and sounds. But I'd be lying if I said I had no doubts. Because when it happens, it doesn't feel like a dream. It feels present, physical, immediate. And now I'm back home, wide awake, still hearing that pacing in my memory. I don't know what to make of it. I just needed to say it somewhere, because I don't think I could ever tell this story out loud to someone I know. I know this might sound strange, and honestly, part of me still feels a little silly even telling it. But it was one of those experiences where you're left sitting there afterward thinking, what am I supposed to do with this? So I figured I'd talk it through. I don't get high very often. For me, it's more of a once-in-a-while thing, usually paired with music, drawing, and just letting my mind wander a bit. But that night was different. It was one of the first times I really felt like I had overdone it. At some point, I got scared. My mind latched onto this idea that I might have a seizure, even though I've never had one before and had no real reason to think that. Still, in the moment, it felt very convincing. So I moved myself into the recovery position and just tried to stay calm, thinking I'd either settle down or, I don't know, deal with whatever my brain thought was coming. After a while, I started to relax. My body softened, my breathing slowed down, and then I felt this really odd sensation low in my body. At first, I assumed it was just tension releasing, or maybe my mind exaggerating normal body feelings because I was in such a strange state. My first thought was almost funny. I remember thinking, okay, now I understand those alien abduction stories. But then the feeling shifted. It didn't feel like just my body anymore. It felt like there was some kind of presence there. Not necessarily threatening, but intentional. Like something was aware of me. For some reason, I responded to it in my head. I basically told this presence, yes, this is okay, but only if you stop when I say stop. And after that, the feeling continued. I don't really know how to describe it without making it sound more dramatic than it was. It wasn't exactly sexual, at least not in the way I would normally understand that. It felt more like being completely held, like being wrapped in the warmest, safest blanket, while something inside me was being gently cleared out. It felt strangely natural, almost ordinary, even though nothing about it was ordinary. Eventually it faded, and not long after that, I got sleepy. Now, the logical part of me knows there's a very real chance it was just my body reacting to being high, relaxed, overwhelmed, and full of strange sensations. I get that. But there's another part of me, the part that's open to spiritual things, that keeps wondering what it meant. Was it harmless? Was it something I shouldn't have agreed to? Did I invite something in without understanding it? Or was it just my brain turning body sensations into a story because I was in an altered state? That's the part I keep coming back to. I don't know enough about spiritual experiences to know how seriously to take it, but I'd like to feel safer in states like that, even just for peace of mind. The strangest part was how quickly my brain accepted it. It was like my mind calmly explained, "That's just someone who loved you in another life." And I was sitting there afterward like, excuse me, where did that come from? I'm not even a very sexual person in everyday life. I don't really have much of a drive for it, and I usually don't enjoy that kind of closeness with other people. But apparently, whatever my brain decided that night didn't fall into the usual category. And the wild thing is, a small part of me almost wants to experience it again. Not because I fully understand it, because I really don't, but because, in that moment, it felt gentle. It felt comforting. Like maybe I wasn't alone. Still, I'd like to know how to protect my energy better, just in case. Because whether it was spiritual, psychological, or just my body making strange little fireworks in the dark, it left me with questions I can't quite shake. I've always been a little sensitive to paranormal stuff. I don't really know how else to explain it. There was one time my mom and I were driving past this old medical building, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know where we were going, and I definitely didn't know people said the place was haunted. But the second we turned onto that street, I got this awful feeling in my stomach. It was sudden, like my whole body just knew something was wrong before my brain did. I honestly thought I was going to be sick. Then, as soon as we drove away and turned down another road, the feeling disappeared completely, like someone had flipped a switch. So, that's kind of the background. The actual story happened at my house. We have this old porch that was turned into a sunroom, and it's connected to the living room by these big glass doors. My younger brothers use it as their playroom, so it's full of toys, and there's also a set of bunk beds in there for when they want to sleep out there, even though they almost never do. One night, or really early morning, I had stayed up way too late. It was probably somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m., and I walked past the glass doors to get a drink from the kitchen. That's when I saw her. There was this figure standing in the sunroom, around the same height as the bunk beds, which are about as tall as me. I'm around 5'6", so she wasn't tiny or child-sized. She looked like a woman, but not fully solid, more like a black shadow in the shape of a woman. And her face, that's the part I still hate thinking about. It wasn't really a full face. It was mostly darkness, except for this huge white grin. It stretched way too far, almost ear to ear, like it had been carved into her. I froze for a second, but I was tired, and I had been watching scary videos earlier that night. So by the next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing, just sleep deprivation, just my imagination filling in the dark. I didn't tell anyone. About a month later, it was around 7 or 8 at night, and everyone was getting ready for bed. My mom was helping my little brother Nolan find his pajamas, and everything was completely normal. Then, my youngest brother started screaming. Not just crying, screaming like something had terrified him down to his bones. We all ran over, asking him what happened, trying to calm him down. And he said that right in front of my bedroom door, he had seen a woman. A woman about my height, with a big white grin stretched across her face. I remember holding him and trying to comfort him, but inside I went cold. Because the whole time, all I could think was, that's the same lady I saw. The lady I had never told anyone about. My mom burned sage through the house after that, and we never saw her again. So this is really a handful of little stories from when I was a kid, and then later when I was a teenager. They all happened in the same house. My dad had lived in that house since he was young, and he never really left. It was the house I grew up in too, so for me, it was just home. But there was always this strange feeling there, especially in certain rooms. Not evil or anything dramatic like that. Just present. Like the house remembered more than it should. My dad and my grandmother had a cat years before, and that cat had passed away in the house. And after that, the feeling was that maybe the cat's spirit had stayed behind. My mom and I both seemed to pick up on it. My parents slept in separate rooms, and my mom's room was right beside mine, so we were always pretty close at night. I used to tell her about these things that would happen when I was half asleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel what was absolutely, unmistakably, a cat jumping onto my bed. And we had living cats at the time, so at first I'd think, okay, one of them got in here. I'd reach over, pat the blanket, and whisper something like, "Come here, baby." But then I'd open my eyes properly, and there would be nothing there. No cat, no movement, no sound. And the thing is, my bedroom door would be closed. I always checked before going to sleep because I didn't like accidentally locking any of the cats in with me overnight. So I knew there shouldn't have been a cat in the room. But I felt it. The little weight landing on the mattress. The tiny steps across the blanket. That soft, careful pressure only a cat has. When I told my mom, she said she had felt the exact same thing in her room too. Not just once either. And that made it feel even stranger, because it wasn't only me half dreaming in the dark. When I was around 9 or 10, I had a couple of friends over, and I told them about the cat that had died in the house. Of course, because we were kids and had no sense of normal behavior, we decided to test it. We filled a cereal bowl about halfway with milk and set it on the floor in my bedroom. Then we left the room, shut the door, and waited. When we came back, the milk was gone. Now, I'll be fair, I was a kid, so maybe I'm remembering some part of it wrong. Maybe there was somehow a living cat in there, even though I was pretty sure there wasn't. Maybe there's a practical explanation hiding somewhere in the walls of that memory. But even as an adult, I still don't really know what happened. And if someone had snuck in and messed with us, I feel like I would have found out by now. Kids are terrible at keeping secrets. That kind of thing would have come out eventually. Then there was my own cat, the one my parents adopted for me when I was about 12. Her name was Luna, and I loved her so much. She had this habit that always unsettled me. She would sit in my room and stare at the same exact corner, where the wall met the ceiling. Not casually either. She would stare like she was locked onto something. Her eyes would get huge, her body would go stiff, and she wouldn't look away. I took pictures and videos of her doing it because it happened so often, and it was always the same spot. And I kept wondering, is she seeing something I can't? Later, I watched a video where someone who studied paranormal stuff said that spirits are sometimes believed to gather higher up on walls or near ceilings because of energy shifts in a room. And I remember sitting there thinking about Luna staring at that corner, and about the feeling of paws on my bed, and about that bowl of milk disappearing. Then I brought all of this up to my grandmother, and she told me that the old cat, the one who had passed away, used to spend most of its time in my bedroom. That was the part that made everything click into place for me. I'm not saying I have proof. I know memories can stretch and blur over time. But I also know what I felt. I know what my mom felt. I know what Luna kept staring at. And I still don't have a better explanation for the milk. So honestly, I think that cat never really left. And maybe, in its own quiet little way, it was still just living in the room it always loved. I should probably start by saying that I'm a pretty scientific person. I don't usually jump to supernatural explanations, and I'm not someone who sees every weird noise as a ghost tapping politely on the wall. But there are some things I've experienced that I still don't really know how to explain. When I was little, we lived in this old house that my family always talked about like it had a second heartbeat. My parents and my older siblings were convinced something was off about it. I didn't fully understand why at the time, but I had awful night terrors there. Apparently, I would wake up screaming. Sometimes my parents would open their eyes and find me just standing beside their bed, staring at them in the dark. I don't really remember doing that, but everyone else remembers it a little too clearly. My older brother once cried to my parents because he could hear me whispering to my stuffed animals at night from his room. Honestly, that sounds like something I might have done, even if I don't remember it. I didn't have dolls or anything like that, just plushies, and I guess they were my tiny audience in the dark. My bedroom had the door to the attic stairs in it, which never helped. The attic was sometimes used as a bedroom for my siblings when they stayed over, but even when no one was up there, I would swear I heard movement above me. Slow little sounds, footsteps maybe, or the house settling, if you want the reasonable answer. There was also this huge window behind my bed, and I hated it. I always felt like someone was standing outside, looking in. There was a bathroom down the hall that had spiders in the corners, and a mirror you could see from far away. I hated walking past it, because my own reflection would catch me off guard, pale and strange in the dim light. The dresser in my room fell over more than once, too. Nothing dramatic in a movie way, but enough that it became one more thing in that house that made me feel unsafe. Years later, we moved into the house we live in now. We've been here for a long time, almost half my life. When we first moved in, my mom had the place smudged. I don't remember what made her feel like that was necessary, but she was serious about it. She also banned Ouija boards completely, which, honestly, I don't blame her for. During the pandemic, my mom was gone for work a lot, and my dad still had to leave the house, so I spent a lot of time home alone. I used to go into my older brother's room to hang out with the cat because it felt less lonely in there. One day, I was sitting in his room, and his backpack suddenly shot out from under the bed like someone had kicked it hard. Not slid, not tipped over. It came out. The cat was on the bed. I was alone in the house, and I just froze. Around that same time, I kept hearing voices through the vents. They sounded like people calling for me from downstairs, but no one was home. I would stop what I was doing and listen, trying to catch it again, trying to convince myself it was pipes or neighbors or my brain making shapes out of sound. Then there were these circles of fog that started appearing on my bedroom window. The room wasn't humid. The window stayed closed. None of the other windows had them. It was strange enough that my family came in to take pictures. In one photo, my reflection didn't seem to be facing the way it should have been. I know that sounds ridiculous, and I'm not sharing the picture, but it stuck with me. I used to be scared of ceiling vents too. Not in a deep, meaningful way. More like the childhood fear of something being in the closet, except for me, it was something watching from above. Eventually, I switched bedrooms, and the new room didn't have a ceiling vent. That actually made me feel better. Then, last year, I had this nightmare that a vent had suddenly appeared in the ceiling, and there was a man staring down at me through it. About a month later, because of air conditioning problems, we had to get a ceiling vent installed in that exact room. That one still bothers me. At one point, we started hearing scratching in the walls and ceilings. I mostly heard it above me, and I tried to brush it off as my imagination or some kind of half-awake noise. But then my mom told me she heard it too, near the walls and outside her door. We checked for rodents. Nothing. No pest issue. Which should have been comforting, but somehow wasn't. A few months after my dad died, the TV kept switching to static. My brother joked that it was him. I laughed because that's what you do when something hurts, and something weird happens at the same time. But part of me didn't know what to do with it. Another time, I was outside in the backyard around sunset. We had friends over, but everyone else was inside. I was sitting there, probably drawing or looking at my phone, and I kept hearing something running through the grass around me, mostly behind me. I assumed it was the dog because it sounded too big to be a rabbit or a cat. When I finally went inside, I kept calling for the dog to follow me. He didn't come, so I figured he was behind the shed. Then I walked into the house and saw him lying there inside, completely calm. Everyone told me he'd been inside for a while. That made my stomach drop a little. I'm not religious. I went to Catholic school briefly when I was much younger, but I wasn't really raised with religion. Still, for almost 2 years, I kept having dreams where possessed people or strange, vague figures chased me, and in the dreams, I would start reciting the Lord's Prayer. I haven't prayed while awake in years, but in those dreams, I remembered the words better than I do in real life. Sometimes I would wake up still saying them. Lately, my sleep has been strange too. If I fall asleep before 1 a.m., I almost always wake up between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning. Even if I go to bed late, I still wake up around then, though it's easier to fall back asleep. Sleeping medication doesn't really stop it anymore. More recently, the lights in the garage started flickering hard whenever I was in there. Then it started happening in other rooms too. It's probably electrical, and I know that. But knowing something might have a normal explanation doesn't always stop it from feeling wrong. Then a soap bottle in a shower no one was using somehow ended up thrown into the middle of the bathtub. That was the thing that finally made me feel like I needed to talk about all of this. And right now, even as I'm saying this, I can hear something in the kitchen that sounds exactly like the cat moving around. But the cat is right here in front of me. When I was little, my family lived in a flat above our business. I was about 5 when we moved in, and we stayed there until I was around 14. And honestly, I never felt comfortable upstairs. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but even as a child, I felt like something was up there. Not just a creaky old building or shadows in the hallway, it felt like a presence, like the flat was occupied in a way none of us could see. I shared a bedroom with my younger brother, but even that didn't make me feel safe. For a while, I was so frightened of going upstairs at night that I would use a bucket downstairs instead. That's how scared I was. I had terrible nightmares growing up in that place. They weren't the kind you could easily describe afterward. It wasn't monsters or anything clear like that. It was more the feeling of them. Confusion, anger, fear. Heavy emotions that didn't feel like they belonged to me. At night, I hated closing my eyes. I always felt like something was either in the bedroom or just outside in the corridor. I also used to sleepwalk. More than once, I woke up in the living room, alone, in complete darkness, with no memory of how I got there. Then, when I was about 12, two things happened that I've never been able to explain. The first was with a VHS tape. I was watching the Amityville Horror in the living room. We had an intercom that connected the flat to the shop downstairs, and at some point, my family called me down for dinner. I stopped the film halfway through and left the tape inside the machine. I went downstairs, had dinner with everyone, and then came back up to the flat. When I walked into the living room, the tape wasn't in the video player anymore. It was sitting right in the middle of the living room floor, and it had been rewound all the way back to the beginning. Nobody had gone upstairs. We had all been together downstairs in the shop the whole time. I remember standing there, just staring at it, trying to make my brain turn it into something normal. But there wasn't a normal explanation. A few months later, something else happened. It was summer, around early evening, and still bright outside. I was alone in the flat, sitting in the living room. Suddenly, the living room door opened. Now, that door didn't just drift open. The carpet was thick, and the door dragged against it, so it took a bit of effort to move. But it opened as if a strong gust of wind had pushed it. I got up to close it, and as I reached the door, the wind seemed to get stronger. Not a breeze, a force. I could hear it, I could feel it pushing back against me. I remember gripping the door and struggling with it, trying to shut it, but it was like something on the other side was holding it open. I was terrified, truly terrified. I didn't dare look behind the door. For what felt like forever, though it was probably only a couple of minutes, I fought against it. Then suddenly, it stopped. The sound vanished, the pressure disappeared, the door closed. I sat down with my back pressed against it and stayed there for hours, waiting for my parents to finish work and come upstairs. I never told them when I was young. My parents weren't really the kind of people who believed in things like that, and I think part of me was afraid they'd just brush it off. Years later, in 2015, when I was 35, I went back home and finally told my dad everything. He looked at me and said, "Why didn't you tell me before?" Then he told me something I wish I'd known earlier, and at the same time, I'm glad I didn't. He said he'd never felt anything strange in the flat himself. But he told me that the mother of the previous owners had died in the bedroom I used to sleep in. She had come from Hong Kong and didn't speak English. And then he told me one more thing. He said he'd spoken to the new owners of the flat. The woman living there had seen the ghost of a woman walking from my old bedroom toward the bathroom. When he said that, my blood ran cold. Because suddenly, all those years of fear didn't feel like imagination anymore. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened years ago. It was in my grandparents' old, narrow house, the kind where one hallway ran almost straight from the front door to the very back. My bedroom was near the front, and the bathroom was all the way at the rear. So if you had to get up in the middle of the night, you had to make that long walk through the dark. And that night, it was late. Somewhere around midnight, maybe a little after. The whole house was quiet in that deep, old house way. No television, no talking, no floorboards creaking from anyone moving around. Just darkness and silence. I remember stepping out of my room and keeping one hand on the wall so I could guide myself down the hall. I could barely see anything. That house always seemed to swallow up light at night, especially in that hallway. It felt longer in the dark, like the back of the house had drifted farther away. When I got near the kitchen, I remembered the kitchen door sometimes swung partly into the hallway. I reached out, found it, and pushed it open the rest of the way so I wouldn't bump into it. And when I looked up, there was a young man standing right there beside the door. Not a shadow, not a shape I had to squint at. He was clear, fully visible. He looked maybe 16 or 17, or possibly in his early 20s. He had on old-fashioned overalls, with the legs cuffed up below his knees. He wasn't wearing a shirt underneath them. That detail has never left me because it was so specific. It didn't feel like something my mind would just invent out of darkness. The strangest part was that he seemed to give off his own light. The hallway was dark, the kitchen was dark, everything around him was dark, but I could still see him plainly. Not glowing like a lamp exactly, but softly lit somehow, like the darkness didn't touch him. And his face is what scared me the most. He looked startled. Not angry, not threatening, just shocked, like he was every bit as surprised to see me as I was to see him. Honestly, it felt like he was shocked that I could see him at all. For a few seconds, I just stood there, frozen. My brain was trying to make a normal explanation fit, but it couldn't. There was no reason for anyone to be standing near the kitchen in the dark, dressed like that, glowing faintly in the hallway. He looked real enough to be a living person, but everything about the moment felt wrong. I didn't say anything. I didn't step closer. I just turned around, put my hand back on the wall, and hurried straight back to my bedroom. I stayed there until daylight because there was absolutely no way I was walking through that hallway again before the sun came up. Years later, I finally told my grandmother about it. I described exactly what I had seen. The young man, the overalls, the legs rolled up, no shirt underneath, where he had been standing, and the stunned look on his face. She got very quiet, and then she told me it was probably my grandfather's younger brother, Ellis, who had died young. Then she said something that made my stomach drop a little. She told me she had seen him in that house more than once. After that, she went and found an old photograph of him. And when I saw it, I knew. It looked just like the young man I had seen in the hallway. That part shook me almost as much as the sighting itself. I hadn't been thinking about him that night. I didn't know what he looked like when he was young. I wasn't trying to have some kind of supernatural experience. I was just half awake, walking through a dark house, trying to get to the bathroom. I know people say old houses can trick you. I understand that. Shadows shift, your eyes adjust. Your imagination fills empty spaces with things that aren't there. But this didn't feel like that. I saw him clearly enough to remember his clothing and the expression on his face. And even though it scared me badly enough to send me back to bed until morning, it didn't feel evil or dangerous. It felt more like I had accidentally crossed into a moment I wasn't meant to witness. Or maybe, for some reason, I was meant to see him. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was an intelligent spirit. Maybe it was some kind of memory caught in the house. Maybe it was a family connection I'll never fully understand. But because of the way he reacted to me, because of that startled look we both shared, I've always felt like he knew I was there. And I've never forgotten him. I've always had a soft spot for the paranormal, but I'll be honest with you. I think part of me always expected my first real experience to be something dramatic. You know, Something big. A full-bodied figure standing at the end of a hallway. Some black-eyed animal watching me from the tree line. A voice in an empty house that says my name when nobody else is there. Something you could point to and say, yes, that was it. That was impossible. But the strange little things I've run into over the years have never really been like that. They've been smaller, quieter, almost annoyingly ordinary. So today, I want to tell you about one of those moments. Not a ghost, not a monster, just a tiny plastic cap from a bottle of grout sealant that disappeared, then came back in a way I still can't comfortably explain. It started after I'd had some plumbing work done behind my shower wall. A section had been opened up so the pipes could be reached, and after the repair work was finished, I was left with the final bit, cleaning everything up and sealing the new grout. I was home alone that afternoon, just trying to get the job done. I had this little bottle of grout sealer, nothing special, and I remember being careful with the cap. I set it off to the side with the other things I was using because I knew I'd need to put another coat on the next day. So when I finished, I reached for the cap, and it was gone. At first, I wasn't worried. It was just a cap. It had probably rolled somewhere. I had the house to myself and nowhere urgent to be, so I started looking. I swept the bathroom floor with a broom. Nothing. Then I got down with a dustpan and hand brush and went over the floor like I was collecting evidence in a tiny, deeply unglamorous crime scene. I checked corners, edges, behind the toilet, near the vanity, under the little pile of tools. Still nothing. And because I know how these things go, I told myself, the one place I don't check is exactly where it'll be. So I checked everywhere again. Then I turned off the lights, got down low, and used a flashlight across the floor from different angles, hoping the plastic would catch the light or throw a little shadow. I looked from above. I looked from floor level. I moved slowly, almost ridiculously slowly. There was no cap. At that point, I decided the most likely explanation was also the most annoying one. It must have gone down the drain somehow. Maybe it bounced. Maybe it rolled just right. Maybe I nudged it without noticing. Whatever happened, it was gone. So I gave up. I took out the trash, put away the tools, and came back to the bathroom one last time, just to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. And there it was, right in the middle of the bathroom floor, standing upright, not tucked behind something, not half hidden by a rag, not against the wall where I could say, all right, maybe I missed it. No, it was sitting in the open, perfectly visible, in the exact area I had swept, crawled over, stood on, and lit up with a flashlight from every angle I could think of. It looked almost placed there. That's the part that still bothers me, because I know how easy it is to say, well, you just missed it. And honestly, most of the time, that's probably the answer. People overlook things. Our brains skip details. Tiny objects vanish into ordinary blind spots all the time. But I can't make that explanation sit right with me. I was careful. I searched that floor. I checked that exact spot more than once. And then, after I stopped looking, the cap was just there. So, what do you even do with something like that? It's nothing, really. A little plastic cap. Not exactly the kind of story that gets thunder cracking in the background, but it felt impossible in the moment. It still feels impossible when I think about it, and maybe that's what makes it linger. Not because it was huge or terrifying, but because it was so small and stubbornly wrong. Have any of you ever had something like that happen? Something tiny, ordinary, and completely out of place, where every sensible explanation technically works, except you know it doesn't. This happened quite a long time ago now. I'd say it was probably around 2015, maybe 2016. It's been over 10 years, so some of the edges of the memory have softened a bit, but the core of it has never really left me. That night, I had gone to bed like any other night. I was lying on my side in my bedroom, facing the wall where the window was, with my back turned toward the door. The lights were off, and the room was almost completely dark. I remember feeling calm, just drifting into that quiet space right before sleep, when your thoughts start to loosen and everything feels far away. Then, out of nowhere, I got this strong feeling that I was not alone. It was not just a thought. It felt physical. My whole body reacted before I could explain anything to myself. It was that deep, uncomfortable sensation you get when you somehow know someone is looking at you from behind. I could feel it in my skin, in my chest, in the sudden alertness that came over me. So I turned around toward my bedroom door. The door was closed, but near the upper part of it, just hanging there in the air, was this glowing sphere. It was about the size of a basketball, maybe a little smaller. The strange thing was the light. It was bright, but not in the way a lamp or flashlight is bright. It did not spill across the room. It stayed inside the sphere, almost contained, like the light belonged only to itself. And I could look right at it without squinting. It did not hurt my eyes at all. At first, I was still lying there in bed, just staring at it. I did not feel fear exactly. I did not sense anger from it, or anything threatening in a normal way. It was simply there, silent, watching maybe, existing. Because I did not feel immediately afraid, I started to think about getting closer. I wanted to stand up, walk over to it, really see what it was. Part of me even wanted to touch it, just to know whether it was solid or warm or anything I could understand. I managed to sit up in bed, but the very moment I thought about standing, something changed. The sphere entered my mind. That is the only way I can describe it. I know it sounds strange, but that is honestly what it felt like. It was not speaking to me, and I did not see any beam of light or signal coming from it. There was nothing visible happening between us. But suddenly, my mind was no longer fully my own. It felt like being hacked from the inside. My thoughts became scrambled. I could not organize them. I could not hold on to one idea long enough to make sense of it. There was this intense pressure, almost electrical, moving through my head. When I was younger, I had an accident where I was shocked by electricity, and the sensation reminded me very strongly of that. Not in my whole body this time, but in my brain. It felt like a current passing through my thoughts. I could barely even open my eyes. Instinctively, I tried to fight it. I remember trying to push back mentally, trying to create some kind of resistance with my own thoughts, as if I could block it out by forcing my mind to stay awake and stay mine. It felt like trying to brace a door that was already being pushed open from the other side. But I could not stop it. I had no chance, really. Within seconds, I was overwhelmed. It was as though my mind simply gave out. I was put to sleep, or switched off, or whatever words come closest to it. One moment I was trying to resist, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. I woke up lying in my bed like nothing had happened. My body was in a normal sleeping position, so normal that it almost disturbed me more. It felt as though I had been placed back there neatly, with no sign that anything unusual had taken place. Afterward, I did not feel sick. I did not have pain, burns, headaches, or any lasting psychological effect that I could notice. The whole thing, from the moment it entered my mind to the moment I lost consciousness, could not have lasted more than 5 or 10 seconds. But those few seconds were enough. I have never forgotten the feeling of that light near the door, or the way it reached into me without making a sound. this is going to sound strange, and honestly, I don't blame you if you don't believe it. Some days I almost don't believe it myself. The more time passes, the more it feels like something I dreamed, except I know I wasn't asleep. I know what I saw. That evening started completely normally. Nothing felt off. I had dinner later than usual, just some leftover rice and chicken my mom had made earlier. She always cooks too much, even though most nights there are only a few of us in the house. My dad was out on a late shift, and my little sister had already gone to bed because she had school the next morning. I remember being careful when I walked past her room, keeping the hallway dark so I wouldn't wake her. After dinner, I sat in my room for a while scrolling on my phone, watching videos I barely cared about. Eventually, I got bored and decided to grab a snack. It was close to 11 by then, and the whole house had gone still in that heavy nighttime way, where even the fridge sounds too loud. That's when I heard my cat outside. He was near the back door, hissing and making this low, awful yowling sound. He only does that when something really scares him, usually another cat in the yard. So I got up and went out to see what was going on. I stepped onto the grass barefoot, and it was freezing. My cat was near the fence at the far side of the yard, tail puffed up, backing away slowly. He was staring at something. At first, I thought it was just a dark shape against the fence. Maybe a bin bag. Maybe part of a tree I'd somehow never noticed before. But it was too tall, too still. Then it moved. Not much, just enough that I knew it wasn't an object. It shifted its weight, almost like it had been standing there for a long time and had finally decided to adjust itself. That was when I realized it was shaped almost like a person. Almost. It was taller than the fence by a lot. Its shoulders were too wide, stretched out in a way that didn't make sense with the rest of its body. Its head looked too small. Its arms hung too low, and the fingers were long and straight, like they weren't resting naturally at all. Then its eyes opened. They were orange, bright orange. Not like animal eyes catching light, not like a reflection. They were glowing by themselves, two round lights looking straight at me. My cat saw them too, because he immediately bolted under the deck and vanished. I should have gone inside right then, I know that, but I just froze. My whole body felt locked in place. Then the thing closed its eyes, and when it did, it disappeared. Not stepped away, not ducked down, it was just gone. I couldn't even see an outline anymore. The space by the fence looked completely normal, like nothing had ever been there. I took a step back toward the house, trying to make sense of it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the dark was messing with me. Then I noticed the fence looked wrong. There was a patch of darkness on it that was darker than everything else, like someone had spilled ink across the wood. And then that patch moved. It didn't walk. It slid through the shadows, along the fence and then onto the grass. When the orange eyes opened again, they were several feet away from where I thought the thing had been. That was enough. I went back inside and closed the door as quietly as I could. I remember that clearly, how slowly I pushed it shut, like making noise would make everything worse. Then I locked it. My hands were shaking. I stood in the kitchen for a while, just staring at ordinary things. The pot from dinner was still on the stove. There were dishes in the sink. Everything looked normal, and that made it worse somehow. I didn't want to look out the window. I wanted to pretend nothing had happened, because I knew if I looked and saw it there, then I couldn't pretend anymore. But eventually I looked. It was still outside. It kept doing that thing, appearing and disappearing. I would catch the orange eyes for a second, and the moment I tried to look directly at them, they would vanish. Then they'd come back somewhere else. After a while, it moved closer to the house. First, I saw it at the kitchen window, just the eyes, hovering there outside. When I turned my head properly, they shut and disappeared. Then it was near the living room window. Then the side of the house. It never knocked. It never scratched. It never touched the glass at all. It just looked in. At one point, I checked on my sister. I opened her door just enough to see she was still asleep. I didn't wake her. I kept thinking she was safe as long as it stayed outside. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't answer. The cat was still gone somewhere under the house. I felt completely alone, even though my sister was just down the hall. The strangest part was when I saw it in the hallway mirror. It wasn't inside the house. I need you to understand that. It wasn't standing there, but in the reflection, I saw those orange eyes, like they were right in front of the mirror. I blinked, and they were gone. Eventually, it stopped coming to the windows as much. I could see the darker patch moving near the edge of the yard again, close to the fence, like it was waiting for me to come back outside. The last time I saw it clearly, it was near the end of the driveway. The eyes opened for just a second. Then they shut. After that, I couldn't see it anywhere. I stayed awake for hours, checking the windows, listening to every tiny sound. I couldn't accept that something like that would simply leave. I kept thinking it had made itself invisible again and was waiting for me to open the door. When my dad finally came home, everything felt normal again, and that was almost worse. The house was quiet. The yard was empty. The cat came back later like nothing had happened. Nobody believed me when I told them. I was angry at myself for not taking a picture, but honestly, in the moment, that thought never even entered my head. I wasn't thinking about proof. I was thinking about staying inside. So that's what happened. Believe it or don't, I can't make anyone understand it. But I know what I saw. I have lived in this house in the north of England for most of my life. I'm 24 now, and we've been here around 20 years. And honestly, the number of strange things that have happened in this place is hard to explain without sounding like I'm making it up. Some of the earliest stories aren't even memories of mine. They're things my mom and family told me from when I was tiny, before I was really old enough to understand anything. Apparently, I had an imaginary friend called Robbie. I don't remember him at all. I only know what I've been told. My mom said she'd sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and find me out of my cot, sitting on the upstairs landing in complete darkness, just playing and talking like someone was there with me. She'd ask, "Who are you talking to?" And I'd say, "Robbie and Daddy." The unsettling part is that my dad passed away a few months before I was born, and my mom hadn't told me that when I was little. There were other moments too. My mom said I'd wake her up at 2 in the morning and say things like, "Mom, Robbie wants a bottle, or he's going to hurt you." I know how that sounds. I really do. But that's what I was told. That was actually in the house next door to the one I live in now. We only lived there for a couple of years, but looking back, it feels like that was just the beginning. The first thing I actually remember myself was the bathroom taps. I was a nervous kid, so I used to sleep in my mom's bed a lot. Probably for longer than I should have, but I was scared of being alone at night. And for months, almost every night when we were trying to sleep, the bathroom taps would start turning on by themselves. Not fully at first, just a little trickle. Then, slowly, they'd open more and more. One of us would have to get out of bed and go tighten them shut. My mom even called a plumber, and when she told him the taps were turning on by themselves, he looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Eventually, that stopped, and for a while, I sort of pushed it out of my head. Then, when I was around 13, something else happened. It was a dark winter evening, and I was getting ready to leave the house. I was the only one home. Just as I was about to go out, I heard my TV switch on upstairs in my bedroom. I don't know where the courage came from, but I ran up to check. The TV was on full volume, blasting some random channel. The weird thing was, I didn't even use that TV for channels. I used it with a DVD player, and whenever it turned on normally, it was always set to volume 20 and showed a blank screen. This time, it was at 100. The attic was another place I hated. It had been converted into a spare bedroom, and my former stepsister used to sleep up there. Sometimes I'd stay up there with her when I was younger. I remember one day a book just fell off a shelf for no reason. After she moved out, I'd still hear footsteps above me at night. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like plug sockets being switched on and off up there. And then there were the dreams. I used to have ghost dreams constantly. I kept a dream journal on my phone for a while, and I swear most of the entries were about being chased, fighting spirits, or seeing figures in the house. One dream that stuck with me was about sleeping outside in the garden because there was a ghost watching me from the window. For a while, I also started waking up at 3 in the morning almost every night. Not exactly 3 every single time, but close enough. 3:07, 2:58, 3:12. It happened so often that I'd wake up with this awful feeling in my stomach and already know what time it was before I checked. But the worst experiences started when my mom moved in with her boyfriend, and I decided, being a teenager, that living in the house alone would be brilliant. And at first, it was. Until one night, I was lying in bed around 11, just about to fall asleep, and my bedroom door swung open. Not a little, it opened all the way and stopped at a perfect right angle. The door had been clicked shut. There weren't any windows open, and even if there had been, the carpet dragged under the door, so it took real pressure to open it. At first, I didn't even feel scared. I was just confused. I sat there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Then the fear hit me. I got up and went straight to my Nana's house. 2 weeks later, almost the exact same setup. I was in bed, about to fall asleep, and my TV remote suddenly flew off the bedside table and landed across the room. Again, I left and stayed at my Nana's. My stepdad used to get annoyed with me for being scared of my room. He thought I was being dramatic. But one night, after an argument with my mom, he decided to sleep in there himself. Later, he told my mom he was sorry for how he treated me about that room. He said he'd been scared too, and he ended up sleeping downstairs. This was not an easily frightened man either. The last major thing that happened in that bedroom was one night when I woke up around 3 in the morning. For some reason, I had this urge to look toward the bottom of the room, and I saw the outline of a woman. I could make out long hair and the shape of a person standing there. I put my head back down, and then it hit me what I'd just seen. So I lifted my head again. She was still there. Something in me snapped into fight mode. I jumped out of bed and swung at whatever was standing there. There was nothing there. I'd punched empty air. Strangely enough, after that, I got back into bed and went to sleep. By then, I'd started calling whatever it was Robbie. I'd kind of accepted, in a strange way, that I had this ghost attached to the house. Maybe the same one I'd apparently known as a child. When I was about 20, I went through a phase where, if I came home drunk, I'd start taunting him. I'd ask him to move things. Then, when nothing happened, I'd call him weak or say he couldn't do anything. Not my smartest habit. One night, I asked him to move a cigarette on the table, and I swear it started rolling back and forth right in front of me. Nobody believed me. Another night, things got much worse. I'd come home from the pub and started provoking him again. There was a houseplant in the front room, and suddenly the leaves started swaying. Not like a breeze had hit them. more like something was gently brushing its hand through them. My stomach dropped. I stood up and moved closer, half terrified and half curious. Then a moth flew in through the open hallway door and landed near the ceiling light. Right after that, every light in the house started going strange. They dimmed down, then brightened again, almost pulsing. Not just one light, all of them. The bathroom light upstairs, the hallway lights, everything. I ran out of the house with nothing but my phone and keys and went straight to my stepdad's. After that, it became a pattern. If I came home drunk and provoked whatever was there, the lights would start flickering. I'd shout at it to stop. It wouldn't. And most of the time, I'd leave. But the scariest thing happened when my mom and stepdad were staying at the house. I'd been drinking again, and they were upstairs asleep. I was downstairs listening to music on the TV, and I decided to test Robbie properly. I made a rough Ouija board out of paper and started asking questions. Nothing happened. Not at first. About an hour later, I got up to use the bathroom. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard this enormous crash from downstairs. It sounded like someone had thrown the heavy glass table across the room. I froze. I didn't want to go down there, so I opened my mom's bedroom door to see if they'd heard it. They were both fast asleep. Eventually, I forced myself to go back downstairs. Nothing was out of place. Not one thing. And that's probably the hardest part to explain. The fear was real. The sound was real. But there was nothing there to prove it. I've been scared in this house more times than I can count. And even now, after all these years, I still don't really know what to call it. I just know it never felt like we were completely alone. I think about this every so often, but lately it's been on my mind a lot more. For a little bit of backstory, when I was around 14, my dad started opening up about struggling with sex and porn addiction. He also admitted that he had cheated on my stepmom. My family was, and still is, very religious, so a lot of what happened after that got filtered through church. My dad started going to meetings for men dealing with the same things, and he would talk about possibly going away to some kind of faith-based rehab or retreat program, though he never actually ended up doing that. One of those meetings was a conference a few hours away, maybe in Ohio or West Virginia. I remember being there with him, sitting in this plain conference room, surrounded by grown men I didn't know. My dad was standing up front, talking openly about his addiction, and suddenly it hit me that most of the men in that room were probably there for the same reason. And I just remember thinking, I really should not be here. At that same time in my life, I was struggling badly with depression. I don't think anyone around me knew how bad it really was. Maybe they could tell I was sad or withdrawn, but mental health was not something my family really talked about. Home didn't feel like a place where I could safely say, I need help. The few times I hinted that I wanted to see a doctor or get real mental health treatment, it didn't go anywhere. The only counseling I was allowed to consider was religious counseling, and at that age, I was already feeling pretty distant from religion. By then, I had come very close to ending my life 3 separate times. I had gone into those moments with the intention of doing it, but either the method didn't work the way I thought it would, or I got scared right at the last second. For a long time, I didn't call them suicide attempts. I felt embarrassed. I hadn't been hospitalized. Nobody in my house even knew what had happened. So in my mind, I told myself it didn't count. After my dad's conference, he, my stepmom, and I drove to another church out in a rural area. It was small and simple, basically one room with pews, but that day it was packed. I'm guessing a lot of people from the conference had come over for the service. I was 14, maybe 15, and honestly, I was bored. I didn't want to be there. I just wanted to sit on my phone and wait for the whole thing to end. Then, sometime in the middle of the service, I think maybe during a song, a man sitting in the row behind us tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, and I remember he was tall, white, and completely unfamiliar to me. I had never seen him before in my life. He leaned down and quietly said, "Hey, I feel like God is telling me that you've tried to kill yourself 3 times. Would it be okay if I prayed for you?" I froze. This was a total stranger in another state. I had not told my friends. I had not told my family. I definitely had not told anyone in that room. And he didn't say, "You've been sad," or "You've been struggling." He said 3 times. I was terrified my parents might hear him. I was awkward and scared and didn't know what else to do, so I just said something like, okay. So he prayed for me. I remember standing there feeling stunned, trying to act normal, and then afterward I probably said, "Thanks," because what else do you even say to that? When the service ended, I paid attention to see if my dad or stepmom knew him. They didn't. He really was just some stranger. That was almost 10 years ago now, and I still don't know what to make of it. I've tried to come up with reasonable explanations. I've turned it over in my mind so many times, looking for some detail I missed, some way he could have known. But I don't have one. What I do know is that he was real. He really said that to me. And even now, my parents still don't know that I struggled with being suicidal back then. I don't fully understand what happened, and I'm not even sure I'm supposed to. But in a strange way, it has given me something to hold on to, a reason to keep going, even when things feel heavy again. So this happened when I was 18, and even now, years later, I still catch myself thinking about it. I'm 26 now, and out of everything I've experienced in life, this is still one of the few moments I truly cannot explain. It happened at my friend Mariella's house. I'd known her forever. She only lived a couple of streets away, and I was over there all the time growing up. She had a big family, and since my house was usually pretty quiet, theirs always felt full of life. I was constantly there, hanging out with Mariella, her younger brother Braden, or one of her sisters. Anyway, one afternoon, Mariella and I made one of our usual fast food runs for smoothies and fries. We were sitting in the car afterward, just talking, when she got unusually serious. She told me strange things had been happening at her house. She'd been waking up with little scratches on her arms, random bruises she couldn't explain. And one night, right on the edge of falling asleep, she heard a voice say, "We're here, Mariella." Now, I believed that she believed it, but at the time, I was still trying to make sense of it. I figured maybe she was having vivid dreams, sleep paralysis, something like that. I didn't think she was making it up. I just thought there had to be an explanation. Then, not long after that, her youngest brother got home from school one day and swore he saw someone looking out through the front curtains at him. He got so scared he didn't even go inside. He ran straight to a neighbor's house and waited there until someone else came home. Again, I remember thinking, okay, maybe he got spooked. Maybe it was a shadow, maybe a reflection, maybe his imagination. A while later, I was over there again. We were all upstairs watching a movie. Mariella's parents were out, so it was just us kids at home. Then her younger sister came up from the basement, absolutely terrified. Not the kind of scared where someone's being dramatic. I mean genuinely shaken, crying, pale. She said, "I just saw somebody go into the basement, and I don't know who it was." At that point, all of us assumed there had to be an intruder. So we got up fast. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, which I think was an old sports club, and we went down there to check. But there was nobody. No door open, no windows disturbed. No sign that anyone had come in or gone out. And their basement wasn't the kind of place where somebody could just disappear. Still, I kept trying to explain it away. Maybe she'd caught a glimpse of movement, and her brain filled in the rest. I was determined to stay rational. And then something happened to me. A few months after that, I was back at Mariella's house on a normal afternoon. She was in her room with her new boyfriend, and I was outside in the yard with Braden, tossing a football back and forth. There were only 4 of us there: Mariella, her boyfriend, Braden, me. That was it. 4 people. I remember that clearly. After a while, I went inside to use the bathroom. As I was upstairs, Braden started messing around outside and throwing the football against Mariella's bedroom window. I could hear her getting irritated, telling him to knock it off before he broke something. It sounded like a normal brother-sister argument. Nothing strange about it. Then I stepped out of the bathroom and saw Mariella storming down the hallway. She looked irritated, moving fast, like she was headed to the front door to yell at Braden face to face. I barely even questioned it at first, because I thought I knew exactly who I was looking at. But then something in me made me stop. I turned back. Mariella's bedroom door was still shut. I opened it, and there she was, still inside with her boyfriend. I froze. Then I looked out the window, and Braden was still outside in the yard. I remember asking him, "Did you just come inside?" That moment hit me like ice water, because I had just seen someone walk down that hallway. Not a blur, not a shadow, not some vague movement out of the corner of my eye. I saw a person move past me and turn the corner. And more than that, I heard them. Bare footsteps on the hardwood floor. Soft, quick, unmistakable, clear as anything. We searched the whole house, every room, every corner, called out to see if anyone else had come home. Nobody. There was no one there besides the 4 of us. And to this day, that's the part I can't shake. I've replayed it in my head so many times. I've asked myself whether my eyes filled in details because I assumed it was Mariella. I've wondered whether my brain just connected sounds and motion and made something ordinary feel strange. But honestly, deep down, I know what I saw. I know I heard someone walk down that hall. And what makes it even harder to explain is how normal the day was. It wasn't late at night. We weren't telling ghost stories. Nobody was trying to scare each other. It was the middle of the afternoon on a completely ordinary day. That's what has always stayed with me. It happened in broad daylight, in the middle of regular life, when nothing about the moment should have felt supernatural. But it did. And I still don't have an explanation for it. I just know that someone, or something, walked down that hallway and then vanished. I've got a story I still can't explain, and even now, saying it out loud gives me chills. I think I was around 8 years old when it first happened. I had a really bad fever that night, the kind that makes everything feel strange. Time felt blurry, my head was pounding, and even the shadows in my room looked wrong somehow. I was lying there in bed, surrounded by all the usual things, my toys, my books, the little lamp on the dresser, but none of it felt comforting. It was like I was in my room, but not really. At some point, while I was drifting in and out of sleep, I noticed something in the corner near my closet. At first, I told myself it was just my sick, half-dreaming mind messing with me. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. There was a man standing there. He was impossibly tall, taller than any grown man I'd ever seen. His frame looked sharp and unnatural somehow, with broad shoulders that made him seem even bigger. And the thing I remember most clearly was the hat. He wore this dark, old-fashioned hat pulled low over his face, so low that I couldn't make out his eyes. But I knew, somehow I just knew, he was staring straight at me. I wanted to call for my mom. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even make a sound. I just lay there frozen, sweating under the blanket, staring at him while he stared back. It felt like forever. And then he was gone. No footsteps, no movement, no sound at all. One moment he was there, and the next, the corner was empty. I never told anybody. I honestly didn't think anyone would believe me. I figured they'd say it was just a fever dream, and for a long time I tried really hard to believe that too. Then years later, maybe 13 years after that night, I was up late scrolling online, just clicking through random articles, when I came across something that made my whole body go cold. It was about this figure people call the Hat Man, a shadowy man seen by people all over the world, usually during sleep paralysis, illness, or those strange states between sleeping and waking. Tall, silent, wearing a hat. And I just sat there staring at the screen, because it was him. It was exactly him. The same shape, the same stillness, the same hat. It felt like somebody had reached into my childhood memory and written it down word for word. I can't even describe what that felt like. Part fear, part shock, and part relief maybe, because suddenly I wasn't the only one. Still, that didn't make it less disturbing. If anything, it made it worse. Because then I had to ask myself, if other people had seen him too, then what exactly did I see that night? Now I'm 26, and I live alone in an old apartment just outside the city. It's quiet here, usually peaceful, maybe a little too quiet sometimes. I have my routines, and most days my life feels normal enough. But every now and then, the nights feel different. The room gets colder for no reason. I wake up suddenly with my heart racing, like something pulled me out of sleep. And there's this feeling I can't really put into words, like the air has changed, like I'm not alone even when I know I should be. About a week ago, things started getting worse. I'd been working late every night, exhausted, staring at a laptop screen for hours. One night, I finally collapsed into bed sometime after 1 in the morning, and I fell asleep almost instantly. Then I had this dream. I was walking down a long hallway with every door standing open, and every time I looked through one of those doors, I saw the same thing. A dark bedroom, a child lying in bed, and a tall figure standing in the corner. Always the same figure. Always the hat. The next night, I told myself I wasn't going to let it get to me. I left the hall light on, put on a podcast for background noise, and tried to sleep like normal. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up again. Not because I heard anything, not because of a dream. It was just a feeling. That awful, ancient kind of fear that hits before your mind can explain it. The kind that tells you something is there before you even look. And this time, I made myself sit up. Slowly, I turned toward the corner of the room. And he was there. Not in a dream, not in some hazy, half-sleep state. He was there, standing in the darkness exactly the way I remembered. Only now, I wasn't a sick little kid anymore. I was fully awake, fully aware, and looking right at him. My whole body locked up. I can still remember how the fear felt. It didn't hit all at once. It spread slowly, like ice water moving through my chest. I wanted to move, wanted to reach for the lamp, wanted to yell, but I couldn't do any of it. He didn't come closer. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Then, after a few seconds, he tilted his head up just a little, just enough for me to see under the brim of the hat. There was no face, just darkness. And somehow, that was worse than anything I could have imagined. Because even without eyes, without a mouth, without any features at all, I knew he was looking at me. Then, just like the first time, he vanished. No sound, no warning, just gone. After that, everything changed. I couldn't sleep properly. I could barely focus during the day. I stopped feeling safe in my own apartment. It was like seeing him again had reopened something in me, some door I'd spent years trying to keep shut. And honestly, I still don't know what I saw. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was sleep deprivation. Maybe the mind can create terrifying things when it's overwhelmed. But a part of me still wonders. Because sometimes, late at night, when the room is too still and the shadows seem a little deeper than they should be, I catch myself looking toward that corner. And every time I do, there's this tiny part of me that thinks, maybe Nolan's Hat Man never really left. So this happened last autumn, when two of my friends, Tyler and Mason, and I headed up for a weekend camping trip in the Upper Peninsula. We found this really secluded spot way out past an old dirt service road, maybe 5 or 6 miles deep into the woods. There wasn't a trail, no signal on our phones, nothing. Just thick trees, a lazy river cutting through the forest, and total silence. Honestly, it felt like exactly the kind of place you go when you want to disappear for a couple of days. The first night was great. We had a fire going, a cooler full of drinks, music playing low, and we spent hours laughing about dumb stuff and telling stories. Nothing weird at all. We stayed up late, then eventually crawled into our tents and passed out. But the second night, that's the one I still think about. It was probably around 11. The fire had died down to almost nothing, and we were all getting quiet. That half-awake, half-asleep kind of tired you get when you've been outside all day. Then from his tent, Tyler suddenly goes, really quietly, "Hey, are you guys seeing that?" I sat up and looked across the river. There was a light over there, like a flashlight. It kept blinking in and out between the trees on the other bank, almost like somebody was walking back and forth with it. And the thing was, we hadn't seen another person anywhere the whole time we'd been out there. Mason unzipped his tent and leaned out, staring at it. He said, "Maybe it's a ranger or something." So we called out. A couple times. Nothing. No answer at all. Then the light just stopped moving, and a second later, it went out. Everything got dead quiet after that. I mean, the kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware of every little sound that isn't there. Mason looked over at me and just said, "That's not normal. Nobody should be out here." But Tyler, who always had to be the one pretending nothing bothered him, threw on his hoodie and said, "I'm gonna check it out. It's probably just some guy messing around." We told him not to, but he was already moving. He went down the bank, found a shallow stretch where some stones broke the surface, crossed the river, and disappeared into the trees. And then we waited. At first, it was only a minute or two, and I figured he'd come back laughing at us for being paranoid. Then it turned into 5 minutes. Then longer. No light. No talking. No movement. Nothing. I was just about to yell for him when all of a sudden we heard branches snapping hard through the woods, like somebody running full speed. Then Tyler came crashing out of the tree line on the other side, soaked, panicked, eyes huge, stumbling back across the rocks. And he just screamed, "Grab your stuff! Right now! We're leaving!" I didn't even ask why. None of us did. We threw whatever we could into our bags, left half our gear behind, and got out of there as fast as we could. We hiked all the way back to the road in the dark, and Tyler didn't say one word the whole time. Not one. The next morning, after we'd barely slept at all, he finally told us what happened. He said when he got across the river, there was nobody there. No campsite, no person, no fire, nothing. Just that flashlight lying on the ground, still on but barely, flickering like the battery was dying. He said he called out a few times and didn't hear anything back. But then, behind him, somewhere in the trees, he heard breathing. Not footsteps, not someone walking around, just breathing. Heavy, quick breathing, like someone, or something, was standing just out of sight, close enough to hear him, just watching and waiting. He said the second he heard it, he ran. And honestly, I believe him. None of us have gone camping since. I'm 25, and my partner, who's 28, and I have been living in this house for a little over 2 years now. For most of that time, it was easy to brush things off. You know, the usual stuff people say old houses do. Little thuds in the night, a door standing open when we thought we'd closed it, objects not sitting quite where we remembered leaving them. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make you pause for a second and then move on. But lately, it's felt different. He's the practical one out of the two of us, really steady, not the type to get carried away. So when he came upstairs from the basement one night looking genuinely rattled, I paid attention. He'd gone down to switch over the laundry, and when he came back, he told me he'd heard someone call his name. Not vaguely, not like a noise that could be explained away. He said it was clear. What got to him most was that it sounded exactly like his grandmother's voice. She's still alive, and of course she wasn't there, but that's what shook him. Ever since then, he refuses to go downstairs alone. He brings our dog with him every time. At first, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to explain it away because that felt safer than believing it. But then something happened to me too, and now I can't really do that anymore. A couple nights ago, I was staying at my parents' house while they were away, and my partner and I had fallen asleep on a video call with our laptops open. In the morning, he left for work and forgot to end the call, but I left mine going because I could still see our dog curled up on the bed at our place. I was just half watching a movie, glancing over at the screen every so often to check on her. My younger brother, Mason, sometimes stops by our house during his work break, so when the dog suddenly started barking, I assumed it was him. It didn't even register as strange at first. Then I looked over at the laptop screen and saw someone reach into frame. I saw these long arms lean in, pet our dog on the head, and say really calmly, "Good girl." The dog relaxed right away, like she knew whoever it was. Then the person stepped back out of view. For the next several minutes, I could hear movement off camera. Just little sounds, like someone shifting things around or looking for something. And I kept thinking it was Mason, because who else would it be? Then I heard someone cough. And I don't know how to explain it, but the second I heard that, this cold feeling just hit me. I got up and went straight to the other room, because Mason was at my parents' house with me. He had been there the whole time. He hadn't left, not even once. We both came back to look at the laptop screen, and by then, everything had gone quiet. Our dog was just asleep on the bed like nothing had happened. I remember my mind going straight to the most normal explanation I could find, which was that somebody had broken into the house. I called our roommate immediately. She told me she'd been home the whole time, just quietly in her room, and she hadn't seen or heard anyone. And I know people will always ask that, but no, it wasn't her. I'm completely sure of that. That's the part I can't stop replaying. I know what my brother looks like. I know his voice, his build, the way he moves. I saw something that looked enough like him for me to believe it was him without question. And our dog reacted like it was someone familiar. She wasn't scared. She interacted with it. And now he's talking about trying to speak to whatever this is. Not with a Ouija board or anything like that. Just waiting until late at night and calling out, seeing if something answers. But honestly, that scares me more than the activity itself. I don't know if acknowledging it makes things worse. I don't know if ignoring it is smarter, or if that even matters. So that's where I am. I'm trying to hold on to logic, but I can't deny what I saw. And when something seems to know your family's voices, your family's faces, and can make your dog trust it, that's the part that really gets under your skin. Hey, this has stuck with me for years now, probably close to a decade, honestly. I remember watching a segment on one of those paranormal TV shows about a business in an industrial park somewhere in Southern California. I can't remember the exact city anymore. Maybe Orange County, maybe the South Bay, but that part never left me. What made it so memorable was the kind of business it was. It wasn't some old inn or abandoned house. It was a high-tech engineering company, the kind of place where people worked with lasers, machinery, and precision equipment. The staff were engineers and scientists, which made the whole thing even more fascinating to me, because these were exactly the kind of people you'd expect to be skeptical. And they were. But they were also genuinely curious. The employees talked about strange activity happening inside the building after hours, and apparently, a lot of it had been captured on security cameras. What I loved was that they didn't come across as frightened or dramatic. They seemed calm, thoughtful, and deeply interested in figuring out what was happening from a scientific angle. They were actually trying to test it, observe it, and make sense of it. That alone would have made the story interesting, but there was another layer to it. Before the engineering company moved in, the same space had been used by a limousine business. The show interviewed some of the former employees from that company too. A lot of the drivers would come back late at night after finishing jobs, dropping off keys, wrapping up paperwork, sometimes even resting there between shifts in the early hours of the morning. And they had their own stories. They talked about objects shifting on their own, keys going missing, sudden noises, flickering lights, all the classic unsettling stuff. But unlike the engineers, the drivers were terrified by it. From what I remember, some of them would bolt out of the building the second something strange happened. I got the impression that the fear around those experiences may have even played a part in the limo company eventually leaving, though I'm a little fuzzy on that detail now. The footage the newer company caught was the part that really blew me away. I remember seeing chairs slide across the floor, laser equipment activating by itself, robotic arms moving when no one was there, bright flashes, and these awful screeching sounds. One detail that really stayed with me was a partition wall or cubicle panel tipping over, which was what apparently made them go back and review the recordings in the first place. Ever since then, I've tried on and off to track down that place again, and I never seem to find the right lead. Every time I search for it, I end up getting unrelated results. Halloween attractions, haunted house events, things like that. But never the industrial park or the business I remember from the show. I guess what I really want to know is whether that company, or maybe a similar one there now, ever kept testing the activity. Whether anything else happened. Whether the strange events continued. For some reason, the fact that the witnesses were researchers and technical people made the whole story feel especially compelling to me. Not because that proves anything on its own, but because they seemed careful, observant, and serious about what they were seeing. And honestly, even now, I still find it incredibly intriguing. It's one of those stories that lingers with you. My name is Thomasina, and I'm 16 years old. I've always been really close to my grandmother. She's deeply religious, so her house has always been filled with crosses, little saint statues, framed prayers, that kind of thing. It's just how her home has always felt. When I was about 13, I stayed with her for a few days. The room I slept in was full of religious items too, like a crucifix above the bed, and small figures of Jesus on the dresser. I remember arriving that first morning, and she was already standing at the front door waiting for me. I had barely stepped inside when I started heading toward the kitchen to get a glass of water, since it was right across from the entrance. But my grandmother stopped me right away and said she would bring it to me herself, and that I needed to go straight to my room and stay there for a while. That immediately felt strange to me, but I listened. She was pretty strict, and I didn't feel like arguing. So I went into the room and started setting my bags down on the bed so I could unpack. While I was doing that, I suddenly heard a loud noise from the kitchen, like a glass had crashed onto the floor. I yelled out, asking my grandmother if she was okay, but she didn't answer. At that point, I got worried and started toward the door. But before I could even leave, the crucifix above my bed fell down, and the bedroom door slammed shut. The window was open, so I told myself it was probably just the wind, but I was already scared. I hurried to open the door, wanting to check on my grandmother, and somehow it wouldn't open. It felt stuck. I started shouting for her, panicking a little, and then all of a sudden, she walked in holding a glass of water like everything was completely normal. I just stared at her and asked what had happened. And she looked at me very seriously and said, "I told you not to leave your room." That only confused me more. I asked her what she meant and told her I'd heard something break in the kitchen. She said nothing had broken and that she had no idea what I was talking about. Then she told me she'd be in the living room and that I could come out whenever I was ready. I told her I'd come out after I finished unpacking. Then I turned and looked at the bed, and the crucifix was back on the wall. I hadn't touched it. That honestly scared me more than anything else. I didn't know what to think, so I lay down for a while and tried to calm myself. I must have drifted off, because when I woke up, it was already close to dinner time, and my grandmother still hadn't called me. I figured I had a little more time to finish putting my clothes away. While I was organizing some shirts in the closet, I noticed a Bible pushed way in the back. It looked almost brand new from the outside, like it had barely been used. I thought maybe my grandmother had forgotten about it, so I took it with me to give it back to her. When she called me to eat, I handed it to her. The second she opened it, her whole face changed. She went pale. Then she looked at me and said, in this sharp, shaken voice, "Where did you find this?" I told her it had been in the back of the closet. She just stared at it for a second and muttered something like, "So that's what this was all about." I asked her what was wrong, and then she showed me the inside. Even though the Bible looked new on the outside, the pages inside were torn, words had been scratched out, and there were these disturbing, dark drawings all over some of the pages. I felt this instant chill. My grandmother closed it immediately and said we had to take care of it right then, and that she'd explain everything afterward. We went out to the patio, and she brought out a box of matches. She burned the Bible herself and stayed there until it was nothing but ash. But from that day on, strange things had started happening around the house. When I told her everything I had experienced in the room, she said she believed that woman had left something deeply wrong behind. Something evil, something intentional. She said that was why she didn't want me wandering around the house earlier. She thought whatever had attached itself to that Bible was causing all of it. And the strangest part? After she burned it, everything stopped. Nothing like that ever happened in her house again. I grew up in this old country house with more rooms than we really needed. And when I was about 6, I got what everyone called my big girl room. My parents thought it would be exciting for me, like this big milestone, you know? But from the very beginning, I hated that room. It wasn't because I was some especially fearful kid either. I really wasn't. Even back then, I wasn't the type to get scared of the dark or jump at every little noise. I was usually pretty bold. But that room? It felt wrong in a way I could never explain. One of the weird things was the light. The bulbs in there were always acting up. Sometimes they'd flicker so dimly they barely changed anything, and the room would still feel covered in shadow. Other times, they'd just go out altogether. My dad even had someone come out to look at the wiring, but apparently nothing was wrong. Still, it never felt normal in there. I had nightmares constantly when I slept in that room. Eventually, I got so upset about staying there that I flat out refused. My dad finally moved my bed into the hallway instead. And even then, I remember lying there, just staring at that bedroom door, feeling deeply unsettled for no clear reason at all. Years passed, and that room mostly stayed shut. We didn't have much use for it anymore, and over time, my family kind of shifted downstairs. We stopped really living on that upper floor unless we needed to grab something from up there. By then, I was maybe 13 or 14, and I was still scared of that one room in particular. Whenever I stepped inside, I had this awful feeling that someone was standing right behind me. Not across the room, not in the doorway, right behind me. So close it almost felt like they were brushing against my back, leaning over my shoulder, staring at my face. I never really told anyone. I just convinced myself it was leftover childhood fear and kept it to myself. Then one day, a priest came to bless the house. It was the first time the place had ever been blessed. Everything was going fine until he reached that room. He suddenly stumbled and went pale. I remember noticing it immediately. He didn't really explain much, but that was one of those moments that made me think, okay, maybe this isn't just in my head. Not too long after that, my dad got diagnosed with cancer. Around the same time, his old clock, one he'd had for decades and that had always worked, suddenly stopped. No one could fix it. So we replaced it with another one, and that one quit almost immediately too. When we put batteries in again, it started running, but backwards. That really upset my dad. More than you'd expect from just a clock. He took the batteries out and put both clocks away in a cabinet. After he passed, my mom took the newer one back out, put batteries in, and it worked perfectly. Then, just out of curiosity, she tried the older one too. Same thing. It worked like nothing had ever been wrong. There was something else that happened around that time that stuck with all of us. My dad had a friend who struggled with serious mental health issues, and at the funeral, which was held at that same country house, he came up to my mom and asked her not to think he was crazy. Then he told her he'd seen something leap off the balcony and run off. He said it was tall, completely black, almost like it was made of shadow. A couple of months later, my mom told that story while we were visiting the house with my aunt, my dad's sister. That finally pushed me to talk about my own experiences there. After I shared that, my aunt got quiet and then admitted that when she was a child, she had also slept in that same room and had terrible nightmares there. She said she always felt watched and eventually had to switch rooms because she couldn't bear it. Once that came out, more stories followed. Other relatives started saying they'd always felt uneasy in the house too, like they were being observed, like they needed to leave. One family member said she once felt someone standing just over her shoulder. She tried to brush it off at the time, thinking maybe it was my dad's spirit visiting the home he grew up in. But even saying it aloud later made her uncomfortable. After all of that, nobody felt quite the same about the house anymore, especially my mom. We visited less and less, and eventually, one last thing happened that made those visits stop completely. My sister, our cousin, and my mom were out on the balcony one day with my dad's favorite music player. They brought it outside to play some songs. Somehow, it started playing gospel music, funeral-type gospel music. The thing was, it wasn't connected to the radio. There was no Bluetooth on, no CD inside, nothing plugged in. That stereo couldn't just store songs by itself. It only worked if something was actively playing through it. My mom said she kept pressing next over and over, but every single track was another mournful gospel song. They got so frightened they left the music player right there on the balcony, got in the car, and drove away. My grandfather had to go back later to bring it inside. And then there's the older family story, the one that makes everything feel even stranger. My great-grandmother and her husband were the ones who built that house on that land. According to family lore, she suffered multiple miscarriages and stillbirths, one after another, until she finally went to see a local spiritual healer. She was told that every time she became pregnant, she needed to buy the weight of a newborn baby in meat and bury it in the backyard. As disturbing as that sounds, she did it. And after that, she went on to have 3 healthy children: my grandfather, his brother, and their sister. So when people ask why that house always felt wrong, why that one room terrified me even when I was a child who wasn't easily scared, why so many people in the family have similar stories, that's the first place my mind goes. Because maybe some places really do hold on to something. And maybe that house never let go. I was 19 when this started, and I'm 26 now. And honestly, part of me still feels like I've never really gotten away from it. Back in college, I became convinced that something dark attached itself to me. I know how that sounds, but I believe it with everything in me. Looking back, I think it started with this old painted portrait of the founder of my dorm. The portrait had gone missing, and for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to track it down and bring it back, like I was doing something noble. That was my first mistake. That whole year, people in my dorm kept going through these bizarre, awful things. It was one thing after another. A girl on my floor, who had never had allergies in her life, suddenly went into anaphylactic shock and had to be rushed to the hospital. The doctors never found a reason. Another student was driving late one night on a back road and hit a horse that had gotten loose. Her car was nearly destroyed, and she was lucky to survive. Someone else got into a serious wreck. Another person tumbled down the stairs and fractured their ankle. And then there were all these other strange, heartbreaking things that kept happening around us. It was a small dorm at a tiny college in a rural town, so you noticed everything. And the worst part was, it didn't just feel like a run of bad luck. It felt connected. People would come back to their rooms and find lights or electronics turned on that they knew they had switched off. Trash would be scattered everywhere. Desk drawers would be hanging open. Things would go missing. More than one person talked about hearing footsteps pacing on the other side of this heavy door near the stairwell. Except when they opened it, no one was there. And there was this heaviness in the building, like something was pressing down on all of us. It got to the point where I went to talk to a theology professor because I didn't know what else to do. I even went to the cemetery in town where the man from the portrait was buried, stood at his grave, and begged him to make it stop. That's how desperate I was. What really shook me was that it wasn't just me. Everyone felt it in some way. One night, 2 other people and I each had separate dreams about the same thing. A shadowy figure, almost like a man made of fog, standing over us while we watched ourselves sleeping. One of those people woke up and found their dorm room door unlocked and standing open. By the end of that school year, I couldn't do it anymore. I moved out and got an apartment off campus. But that summer, before I officially left for good, I was still working for the school while youth camps were using the dorms. After one camp checked out, another worker and I had to do a routine walkthrough of my old building. I went back up to my old hallway, and for some unbelievably stupid reason, I called out to whatever had been there. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted to feel brave. Instead, I heard this sudden, violent pounding on a huge metal door at the far end of the hall. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. I never went back into that dorm after that. And the really unsettling part? The next year, people said the dorm felt different, lighter, like whatever had been there had finally left. Only, I don't think it left. I think it left with me. The apartment off campus was better in some ways, but things still happened. Small things, mostly. Objects shifting when they shouldn't. Shadows moving at night in the dim light coming through the windows. Nothing as dramatic as before, but enough to let me know something was still there, still close. After that, I moved again, this time into an apartment with a roommate while I was in grad school, and it all kept going. Lights would slowly brighten and dim on their own. Chairs in the kitchen would be pulled way out from the table, like someone had just stood up from them. We'd hear heavy footsteps racing down the hallway at all hours, day or night. I was so overwhelmed at that point that I called a priest, hoping someone would finally take me seriously. He brushed me off completely. I can't even explain how defeated that made me feel. Now I live in a house with my husband, and things still happen. Not constantly, not like in college, but enough that I can't pretend it's over. One day, an old handmade broom appeared in our furnace closet. Rough wooden handle, thick straw, something that looked like it belonged in another time. Neither of us will touch it. Faucets turn on by themselves. We hear voices sometimes, and every now and then I catch that same perfume scent when I'm not wearing any. It just keeps going. I hang rosaries over the bed because it makes me feel a little safer. I pray the prayer to St. Michael. I do whatever I can think of because I'm tired. I'm so tired. Sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear these rough, raspy voices right by my ear telling me to wake up. My family has always been sensitive to things like this, so I grew up believing the paranormal was real. That part has never been hard for me. What's hard is living with the feeling that something has stayed with me all these years, moving from place to place, waiting for me to notice it again. And more than anything, I just want to know if it's ever going to end. So, we moved into this old house from the 1800s a little over a week ago, and ever since the first day, something about it has felt off. Not dramatic, just this quiet, unsettling feeling that I can't really explain. Anyway, last night it was almost 1 a.m, and I was still awake in bed with my laptop, just mindlessly scrolling and waiting to feel tired. I wasn't half asleep or imagining things either. I was completely awake. Then I heard noise coming from downstairs. It sounded exactly like someone opening and rummaging through a drawer in the kitchen, like they were looking for medicine or searching for something small. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe my dad was downstairs and needed to grab something. A few minutes passed, and then I heard this howl. Not a normal dog sound, not even close. It was deep and strange, almost wolf-like, but also weirdly human, like someone crying out in pain. Then there was a second one right after it. Now, I have 2 dogs, but they're tiny, older dogs. One of them is Milo, and he's been with us since he was a puppy. The other is an older female rescue named Poppy. Neither of them should be able to make a sound like that, especially not Milo. It didn't sound like a small dog at all. Right after the second howl, Milo started whining loudly. Not barking, not growling, just this really distressed, panicked whining that instantly put me on edge. So I got up and went downstairs, expecting to find my dad there. But no one was there. That's when I started feeling really uncomfortable. I forgot all about the drawer at first because my focus went straight to the dogs. Milo was clearly upset, and there was this small lamp on nearby, which I assumed one of my parents had left on for them. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't settle, so I went to get my mom. The whole time, I had this horrible feeling that we weren't alone. You know when nothing is happening in front of you, but every instinct in your body is telling you something is wrong? That's what it felt like. My mom came downstairs and stayed with me and the dogs for a bit. After a while, when I started heading back upstairs, she looked at the lamp and asked, "Wait, how did this light get turned on?" I told her I didn't turn it on. I said I thought they had left it that way. She just looked at me and said they hadn't. And that honestly shook me more than the noises. I know there are logical explanations for some of this. Milo could be stressed because of the move. He's old, and this is a completely new place. Poppy was pretty calm, but she's been rehomed before, so she's more used to change than he is. But the sounds? The drawer? The lamp turning on by itself? That's the part I can't explain. And I swear, it's not just me. The dogs feel different here too. It's like the house has this energy that they noticed before we did. Maybe there's a normal reason for all of it. I honestly hope there is. But last night really felt like the house was awake. Hey, I wanted to share something that happened to me and see if anyone else has ever gone through anything like this. A couple of days ago, I went to this museum in Savannah with my partner, and before I say anything else, I want to be clear that this is not me criticizing the place at all. It was thoughtfully done, really detailed, and obviously put together with a lot of care. But for some reason, I couldn't stay. The moment I stepped inside, I felt this really intense heaviness. It hit me almost immediately. I was standing there getting my ticket, and I started to feel disconnected, like I was sort of drifting outside myself. Then the shaking started. I do deal with anxiety, so at first I told myself that was probably all it was. I figured maybe I was just nervous and needed a minute to settle down. But while we were waiting near the front for the tour to begin, it got worse. I had to sit down because I was getting so shaky, and suddenly I felt overwhelmingly hot. I know Savannah can be warm, and the building itself wasn't exactly cool, but this felt extreme. My face got flushed. I started sweating way more than normal, and I couldn't stop trembling. The strange part was, I hadn't even really gotten into the main exhibits yet. As we moved farther into the museum, everything intensified. What started as heat and shaking turned into this pressure in my chest and this deep, crushing exhaustion. It wasn't like my usual anxiety attacks. I wasn't crying, I wasn't spiraling, and I didn't feel that familiar panic. It was more like this heavy, draining force that kept building the deeper I went. There were certain rooms where it felt especially strong. In one corner, I honestly felt like I shouldn't even get too close. I remember avoiding certain objects without fully understanding why. A few times I had to lean on my partner because I felt so unsteady, like I might actually pass out if I stood there too long. By the time we made it through one of the more disturbing exhibit rooms, I finally turned to him and said, "I need to leave right now." So we did. We headed straight for the exit. And even after we got outside, it didn't stop right away. I was still shaking and sweating for close to an hour afterward, and I felt unbelievably drained. Then, little by little, my energy came back. What really stays with me is how different it felt from normal fear or anxiety. I've been to creepy places before. I've seen unsettling exhibits, old buildings, all kinds of things, and I'm usually fine. Growing up, my sisters and I had experiences we couldn't explain, and even my kids have said things over the years that made me believe there's more out there than we always understand. So I've never been someone who automatically dismisses strange experiences. But this felt different. It was physical, emotional, and heavy in a way I've never felt as an adult. So now I'm left wondering what that was. Was it just my nerves reacting to the atmosphere and the subject matter? Was my body trying to tell me something? Was I just more sensitive than I realized? I honestly don't know. Part of me wonders if I should try going back, since the ticket is still valid and I didn't get to finish. But another part of me feels like maybe I shouldn't push it. Whatever it was, it didn't feel good, and it definitely didn't feel normal for me. Hey, I've never really known what to call this story, so I'm just going to tell it the way I lived it. My husband Ryan and I have been together since 2018, and for almost as long as we've been together, strange things have happened around us. Not subtle little creaks or maybe I imagined that moments either. I'm talking about faucets turning on by themselves, cabinet doors swinging open and slamming shut, heavy doors closing when they normally have to be shoved, and banging on windows hard enough to scare everybody in the house. At one point, we had friends over and all of us heard it. One of them was so shaken up she almost booked a hotel for the night. But the part that really stuck with me started about 2 years ago, when everything seemed to get more intense. At the time, we were living on my in-laws' property, in this big detached garage that had been turned into a studio apartment. The main house was nearby, but we had our own separate space. One night, I woke up out of a dead sleep because I heard what sounded like a police siren doing that quick little chirp, like when an officer is trying to get someone's attention. I opened my eyes expecting to see flashing lights through the blinds. Before I could even process it, Ryan shot straight out of bed. Not slowly, not groggy, just instantly upright like something had jolted him awake. He started pacing at the foot of the bed, and I kept asking him what was wrong, what happened, what he heard. He looked at me and said he didn't hear a siren at all. He said he heard his mom's name screamed right in his face. I looked at my phone. It was 3:25 in the morning. I was ready to text his mom right then, just to make sure she was okay, but Ryan told me to wait and call her in the morning. We tried to lay back down, but neither of us could settle. At one point, he asked if I was touching his back. Both my hands were flat on the bed beside me. We finally drifted back to sleep, and when our alarms went off at 5, he called his mom immediately. He asked how she'd slept, and she said, "Not very well." He asked why. She said, "Because somebody yelled my name in my face around 3:30. She lived about 45 minutes away, in the house Ryan grew up in. So that's the kind of thing I mean. Not just creepy, shared. The family's first thought was his uncle, who had passed away in that childhood home after a long battle with cancer. Ryan had been there, holding his hand when he died. But even Ryan said he'd experienced weird things in that house long before his uncle ever got sick, so that explanation never fully fit. A few months later, Ryan was out late with friends, and I was asleep when he got home sometime after 1 in the morning. I heard him come into the bedroom and head straight into the bathroom. He flipped the light on, and I called out, "Hey babe, how was your night?" Right as he started answering, this massive bang exploded through the room. It scared both of us so badly we jumped. We turned on every light and started looking around, and that's when we saw it. The dresser between us had its bottom drawer kicked inward. Not slightly off track. I mean shoved in so hard it had broken off the rails. There was almost nothing in it, just a pair of jeans and an old t-shirt, so it wasn't from weight or pressure. It looked like someone had physically kicked it. Then, a few months after that, there was this old racing clock I had hanging on the wall. A friend had picked it up for me at a thrift store because I love vintage NASCAR stuff. It never worked. I never even put batteries in it because it was basically just decoration at that point. No batteries. No explanation. And all throughout that period, the smaller things kept happening too. Roommates saw it. Friends saw it. One roommate's girlfriend was home alone one day, lying in bed, when their bedroom door slowly opened all the way on its own. That door dragged hard against the carpet and took effort to move. She got up and left the house right after that. That's part of why I stopped believing this was just one familiar spirit, or one family member hanging around. Why would it do things like that to random people in the house? Why make everyone feel unsafe? Eventually, Ryan and I bought our own home. We got the keys in July last year, and honestly, It felt like a fresh start. No roommates, no old property, no history attached to the place. For a while, everything was peaceful. All the strange activity stopped, and I really thought maybe whatever it was had been tied to the old house. Then it came back, and somehow, it seemed to come back for my in-laws too. One night last week, Ryan was out with friends again, and I was lying in bed by myself. I heard footsteps move down the hallway toward our room. Clear footsteps. I called out for him, but there was no answer. I checked his location on my phone, and he was still out. I did a quick scan of the house, locked myself in the bedroom, and told myself I was probably just hearing things. Then the next night, Ryan came home while I was asleep. I woke up to him saying, "Nope, absolutely not." He was standing at the foot of our bed, tense as anything. I asked him what happened, and he told me that when he walked into the room, he saw something move past him and out of the doorway. He said it looked darker than the dark around it, not solid exactly, but there. And he said he could hear it move. That shook me, because suddenly those footsteps I'd heard the night before didn't feel imaginary anymore. Later that same night, around 1 in the morning, I woke up because our 1-year-old pit bull was pacing in the hallway. I figured she needed to go outside. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the bedroom door across the hall slowly closing by itself. Not slamming, not drifting, just deliberately closing, inch by inch, until it shut. I just remember lying there thinking, what am I even supposed to do with this? Around that same time, my mother-in-law called Ryan about her dog, a German shepherd who had suddenly become terrified at bedtime. The dog wouldn't walk past the side of the bed to get to her crate anymore. She would freeze, cower, and resist like something was there scaring her. That night, my mother-in-law finally got the dog into the crate, and the poor thing pressed herself as far into the back as she could, like she was trying to disappear. While my mother-in-law stood there watching her, trying to understand why she was so scared, she heard a loud bang. The dog started yelping, and right in front of her, the front of the metal crate bowed inward, like something had kicked it hard. There was nothing on top of it, nothing leaning against it, nothing that could have caused that kind of force. She watched it happen. So now I'm sitting here with cameras set up inside the house, hoping maybe I'll catch something, even though I'm not sure I really want to see it. A friend gave me crystals and sage after I finally opened up to her about everything. And what's strange is that before I even told her the full story, she had come over for Ryan's birthday, stood in the driveway with me, stared at the front of the house, and said, "Does it feel like something is watching us?" That was exactly how I'd been feeling. More than anything, I think I'm telling this because I want someone to understand how unsettling it is to live with something you can't explain. When it happens once, you can dismiss it. When it keeps happening, and other people see it too, and even the dogs react to it, it starts to feel like whatever this is has its own pattern, its own presence. And honestly, that's the part that scares me most. Hey, so before I get into this, I need to say this is one of those things I still can't fully explain. I've never had anything like it happen before, and honestly, I hope I never do again. But at the same time, I still catch myself wondering what exactly happened that night. At the time, I'd been living in that house for about 5 years, and up until then, I'd never once felt uneasy there. It was out in the country, really private, with a lot of land and hardly any neighbors. From the property, you could only see one other house way off in the distance. The place itself was huge, with the main house upstairs and an in-law suite downstairs that was basically its own apartment, separate entrance, kitchen, laundry, bedrooms, the whole thing. I was a couple of years into a divorce back then, and my ex hadn't been around the property in a long time because of a court order. During that stretch of my life, a few close friends had moved in with me, and over time, they became like family. One of them, my best friend, was staying in the downstairs suite with her boyfriend most weekends. That night, my daughter, who was almost 18, had a couple of her friends over. My son, who was a little younger, had a few buddies there too. Everybody was asleep by the time any of this happened, and none of them noticed a thing. Earlier that evening, around 7, I'd talked with my best friend for a bit, then I went out with a couple of friends. She and her boyfriend stayed home like usual, hanging out downstairs. I got back to the house sometime around 3 in the morning. One of my guy friends was driving me home in his pickup, and we came rolling up the driveway with the windows down, music playing, just in that carefree late-night mood. We pulled up near the garage, I hopped out, punched in the code, and opened the garage door. Then we stood there outside his truck for a minute while he finished a cigarette and we kept talking. And then, all at once, everything went quiet. I didn't even fully register it in the moment, but looking back, that silence is one of the parts that sticks with me the most. No insects, no frogs, no breeze, nothing. Just this dead, total silence. Then I heard something. It came from somewhere near the edge of the outbuilding behind me, maybe 70 or 80 feet away. I still can't describe the sound properly. It was strange, but vague enough that at first I thought maybe I'd imagined it. So I told my friend, "Wait, stop talking for a second." And then I heard it again, only closer. This time, it sounded exactly like a baby crying. Not vaguely, not sort of. It was clear as day, like an infant crying out in the dark. The second I heard it, I was hit with this overwhelming wave of fear. I don't mean I felt nervous or spooked. I mean I had this raw, instinctive certainty that if I stayed where I was, something terrible was going to happen. Like every part of me was screaming, "Get inside right now." I grabbed my friend and told him to put the cigarette out. I basically dragged him into the house, shut the garage, locked the door to the garage, and started turning off lights and closing blinds as we moved through the house. I checked on all the kids first. They were asleep, completely peaceful, no sign that anything had disturbed them. Then I went through the rest of the house, checking doors, windows, locks, all of it, until I finally felt like I could breathe a little. The next day, around 11 or so, my best friend came upstairs like she usually did, so we could figure out breakfast for the kids and just talk. She sat down on the edge of my bed and said, "Okay, I almost don't even want to tell you this because you're going to think I'm insane." I just stared at her because I already knew. She told me that earlier that same night, she and her boyfriend had been outside on the downstairs patio. They had music on, the patio lights were glowing, and they were just sitting out there talking, smoking, relaxing. Then they heard a strange sound too. She said neither of them could really explain it, only that it was something they absolutely did not expect to hear out there. As they listened, it started to sound like something moving fast through tall grass, except the strange thing was that it felt close, much closer than it should have been, and yet they couldn't see anything at all. She said both of them were hit with the same awful feeling at the exact same time. Pure dread, like immediate danger was right there with them. Her boyfriend, this big ex-military guy who was not easily rattled, apparently jumped up and told her to get inside now. They ran into the suite, locked the patio door, shut the curtains, and stayed in for the rest of the night. When we compared notes, it sounded like her experience had happened maybe 20 or 30 minutes before mine. That was the part that really got me. If it had just been me, I probably would have spent years trying to convince myself I was overtired, or tipsy, or overreacting. But it wasn't just me. She felt it. Her boyfriend felt it. My friend heard what I heard. Different parts of the property, same night, same kind of fear. I still don't know what it was. I've turned it over in my head so many times. I've tried to explain it logically, and I've also let myself wonder about the things that don't fit into logic so neatly. Whatever it was, it left this mark on me. Not because I saw something, because I didn't. Not because anything physical happened, because nothing did. It was the feeling. That absolute, unmistakable sense that something was deeply wrong, and that every instinct I had was telling me to run. And even now, after all this time, that's the part I can still feel. So, this happened maybe 10 minutes ago, and I still can't quite shake it. My boyfriend and I were sitting together on the couch in the living room, just winding down for the night. I was scrolling through Amazon, half focused, and he was listening to me ramble about random stuff like he always does. Then there was this little pause in the conversation, and out of nowhere, we both heard it. This long, sad meow. And I mean, it sounded exactly like my old cat Millie. She was this tiny Siamese girl I had for years, and when she got really old, especially near the end, she'd sometimes cry out at night in this lost, hollow way. It was like this confused, "Where is everybody?" kind of meow. One of us would go to her, and the second she saw us, she'd do this soft little happy chirp and come trotting over like everything was okay again. It became such a familiar part of life with her. I had to say goodbye to her about 4 months ago. She'd been fighting small cell intestinal lymphoma for close to 2 years, and near the end, she also developed kidney disease. On top of that, she kept getting UTIs, and between that and the side effects from treatment, she was just getting weaker and weaker. I still carry some guilt about it, honestly. I keep wondering whether I should have taken her in sooner for more supportive care, whether I missed something, whether I could have bought her a little more comfort or a little more time. But deep down, I know I didn't make the wrong decision. She was fading fast. She didn't care about her favorite foods anymore. She stopped playing. She was tired. I loved her too much to let her keep suffering. Since she passed, I've been dreaming about her a lot, like constantly. Not every single night, but often enough that it feels significant. And in those dreams, she's always healthy again. Always her old self. We're usually back in my parents' house, where I grew up with her, except everything feels softer there somehow. Brighter, calmer, almost too beautiful to be real. She'll curl up against me, knead on me, and I'll pet her, and it feels so real that when I wake up, it almost hurts. Sometimes there's even this weird continuity between dreams, like I'll leave a toy out for her in one dream, and it'll still be there in the next. I know that's probably just grief and memory doing what they do. Still, a part of me likes to wonder. Anyway, back to tonight. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, but before I could even say anything, my boyfriend looked at me and went, "What was that?" And we both just knew. We both said it sounded like Millie. Not vaguely, not kind of. It was her. That same scared, searching meow, like it was coming from the bedroom. He got visibly uneasy, so I got up to check. Of course, when I opened the door, it was just my dark, empty room. Nothing there. But without even thinking, I said, "Millie, it's okay." The same way I used to when she got confused. And I don't know. I really hope that if some part of her was there, it helped. That's the part I can't explain. My boyfriend is still kind of freaked out by it, but I wasn't scared. I actually felt strangely comforted. A little sad too, because if it really was her, I hate the thought of her sounding frightened or lost. I wish it had been something gentler, something happier. But mostly, I just keep hoping she's okay, wherever she is. What really gets me is that he heard it too. I honestly don't know what to make of it. I just know that for 1 second, it felt like she was close again. Okay, so I've been working in this little metaphysical shop for almost 5 years now. You know the kind of place. Crystals lining the walls, tarot readings in the back, shelves full of spiritual books, incense in the air all the time. The owner, Mara, is in her 70s, and for a long time I honestly thought she was one of those rare people who just seemed touched by magic in the best possible way. And before I tell you what happened, I guess I should say this. I'm not someone who believes everything right away. I'm actually pretty skeptical by nature. I've got 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's, and a doctorate, so I'm used to questioning things and looking for explanations. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm mostly saying it because I want you to understand that I'm not usually the person who jumps straight to, "It was supernatural." I started working at the shop after trying to build my own small business during the pandemic. That's when I met Mara. We clicked pretty quickly. She liked that I knew a lot about crystals and mineral lore, but I think she also liked that I came from an academic background. I'd spent some time teaching online, and honestly, it made me miserable. That whole path I thought I was going to have just slipped away. Working in the shop ended up becoming this unexpected chapter in my life. And Mara, she really did become like family to me. She helped me more than I can explain. She was generous, kind, and there was this almost fairy godmother quality about her. But over time, once she trusted me, I learned that she carried some very heavy things from her past. I'm not going to share her personal business because that wouldn't be right. But I will say this. There was a long-term addiction, a deep source of shame, and a very dark stretch of her life that she had buried so thoroughly that, because of her age and memory issues, she sometimes seemed to forget she'd ever told me about it at all. Every now and then, she'd hint at it in this joking way, like, "I could tell you, but then I'd have to get rid of you," and laugh. It was never threatening. It was more like humor covering pain, covering guilt. A lifetime of it, honestly. So one afternoon, I was alone in the shop. A regular customer had come in, a young mom who sometimes brought her baby with her. She'd let him toddle and crawl around on the carpet while we talked. And that day, we were both sitting on the floor, half chatting and half making sure he didn't start chewing on books or pulling things off the lower shelves. It was quiet. No one else in the store. From where I was sitting, I could see straight into the office. We always left that office door open. It was where Mara usually sat when she was there, and where she'd go when she wanted privacy. So we're talking, and all of a sudden, I see something move under her desk. Not a flash, not a maybe, not something in the corner of my eye. It was small and completely black, like solid black, darker than the shadows around it. It sort of slithered or glided out from under the desk, paused for just a second, then slipped right back underneath. And I just froze. I didn't say anything to the woman with the baby because I didn't want to scare her. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Hey, there's some nightmare-looking thing coming out from under my boss's desk." No. So I stayed calm on the outside and kept talking. But inside, I was completely locked in on that office. Then it happened again. This time, I was watching directly. Straight at it. No doubt. No peripheral vision tricks. No weird reflection. I was looking right at it. It had no face that I could see. No eyes. No features. Just this smooth black shape. Maybe about the size of a weasel. Or maybe more like a long, thick snake. Moving in a strangely fluid way. I was maybe 7 or 8 feet away from it, close enough that if it had been a real animal, I would have been able to tell. It slid out from under the desk, then turned and disappeared beneath it again. After the customer left, I went straight into the office, and the first thing I noticed was that the little mini fridge on the counter was hanging open. That door didn't just swing open on its own. I'd never seen it do that before. Not once. I looked everywhere, even though the office was tiny. Just stacked boxes, minerals, crystal inventory, papers, the usual clutter. There was nowhere for anything to really hide, but there was nothing there. Still, the whole room felt wrong. My skin prickled the second I stepped inside. I had goosebumps all over. Later on, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I saw had something to do with Mara. Not her exactly, but maybe something attached to her. Something old. Something dark that had followed her through life, feeding on the pain and secrecy she carried. That's just a feeling, obviously. I can't prove that. Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe someone out there would hear this and know exactly what kind of thing it sounds like. But I know what I saw, and even though I never saw it again, I can still picture it perfectly. I don't think I'll ever forget it.